1 minute. Well, good afternoon, everybody. I am Rudy Shankar. I'm the Director of the Energy Systems Engineering at Lehigh University, and this is our Fall 2021 Project Symposium. The students who are enrolled in this program have a chance to present their results, and these are all interim results. So I just want to kind of caution you that they'll be still working on it for next semester, so they'll have interim results to talk about. And so really, they've worked really hard this semester. They all know that for each credit hour, that they devote up to 5 to 10 hours every week. And so this has been a long and very productive semester. And they'll get a chance to present this. And that's really the centerpiece of what you'll be hearing today. But I do want to go over the agenda because it is a long day. It's a long Zoom day. In the past, of course, we had poster presentation. People could wander around. But unfortunately, because of the pandemic, the last 4 times we've been doing this. You can see that we've become a little more skilled at Zoom project symposia, but we're always willing to learn more. And so I will kind of break down what you'll be hearing for the rest of the day in broad chunks. The first item, of course, is the project presentations. It'll start from when I start talking, that'll be very soon, to about 2:30, 2:45. And so while these presentations are being made, Susan had distributed evaluation forms electronically, and I'll ask her to go over that. We'll go over it again when it's time to complete it. So Susan, if you could talk about what the evaluation forms are about and how to go about filling it.
Sure. The evaluation form is broken up into the students' presentations, and the way it's set up is, for instance, the first presentation is done by Anna and Liam. You'll have, although they're a team project, you'll have the opportunity to evaluate each of them individually. And it's the electronic form is just so much easier because then you are able to also insert your own comments at the end in legible reading that we can actually translate. Sometimes we couldn't read the handwriting. It got a little hard. So this is a much easier and quicker way to consolidate all the results and the evaluations. So it's a Google form. So all you do is click on that, and the only thing we request is your name and your email, just so we know who it's coming from. And then you just evaluate all the way through, and then just hit submit at the end, and that's it. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. I'll put my email address in the chat box in case anybody has any difficulties.
Okay, so thank you, Susan. So what you'll be hearing from 9 students on 7 projects. Each of the projects has been vetted, with the industry sponsor. And so they work with an industry project manager, and I'm really glad to see many of those project managers are actually present at this broadcast. So there are 7 projects, 9 people. So there's a team of two in two of those projects, and so they will get more time than the single team projects. So they're called Team 1 through Team 7. We're very creative about naming, and each of them will get a shot as we go forward. So once we finish, we'll then hear a keynote address by Bashara Jara, who's a manager at PP&L Electric Utilities. And that'll go on from 2:45 to 3:30. And then 3:30, we'll break away for our Industry Advisory Council meeting that we traditionally hold during this project symposia. And that is by invitation only, and that'll last up to 5 o'clock. So that's in broad strokes the agenda for the day. And so if there are no questions, I will start the ball rolling with the project presentations. And if there are no questions, I'll start now. Okay. All right, so let's start with Team 1 in the project presentation. And so it's Liam and Anna, please take the floor.
All right, I can share my screen. Everybody see my presentation?
Yep.
All right.
All right, hello, my name's Anna Osorio.
And I'm Liam Hughes.
And for our capstone project, we're creating the simulation of a virtual power plant. We are collaborating with DR NetSoft for our project. Our virtual power plant will encompass 9 buildings from Kaiser Permanente that are in California. We are looking at the data from the year of 2020 to create our simulation and to figure it out what would be the best way to respond to an event from a demand response program. So our industry sponsor, DR NetSoft, is a software company that focuses on helping the environment by aggregating DR assets and managing them for utility companies using virtual power plant technology. Many issues need to be addressed within the energy system that's in place today, but those are the ones that we're going to be focusing on. Under grid reliability and resilience, the centralized energy generation process that is in place today causes the loss of energy throughout the grid. Changing to a more decentralized system would help consumers and utility companies. The time of use pricing within the state of California, time of use pricing is influential over your utility bill. If electricity is used between 4 and 9 p.m., the price will be higher. That happens every day, and people have learned that if you use energy during those times, you have to pay more for your electricity. There are issues for utility companies today, and under that, we have peak time of energy consumption, which causes electric companies to purchase energy from the day-ahead market. The day-ahead market costs so much more for the companies, and most of them pick up the bill while some pass the big price tag to consumers. The problem with data visibility comes from the inability of utility companies to predict when behind the meter DER, such as solar or fuel cells, will be producing energy. And unexpected generation or lack of it can cause voltage regulation issues and DER tripping throughout the grid. So we're looking to solve those issues with the creation of a virtual power plants in California. And so what are virtual power plants? They are cloud-based distributed power plants that aggregate many types of DER with the goal of efficiently generating, trading, and or selling energy to the electricity market. The DR units can belong to consumers as well as electric companies, but the main goal of a virtual power plant is to have a vast amount of energy generation sources and storage systems that consumers and electric companies can benefit from. So for our project, again, we will focus on simulating and analyzing the creation of a virtual power plant.
All right, so moving on, we can go over the overall scope of our project. So once again, we're tasked with developing a simulated virtual power plant scenario that can accept meter data from a set of assets and manipulate them in the most efficient way possible to respond to a load reduction request from the system operator. In a real scenario, the system operator, which is in our case is CAISO, the California system operator, will deem a demand response event necessary and dispatch a request to various utilities. Those utilities in turn will relay that request to their customers or aggregators who are signed up for their demand response programs, and they will reduce their intake from the grid in whatever way they can. So the scope of our project can be summed up in the image below. Now we're focusing on the elements in the red dashed lines. So that's the programs, the requests, and the DERs. And as far as operations go, we have to model this simulation against appropriate demand response programs provided by the applicable utilities. From there, we can determine the trigger event, the criteria that trigger events, and simulate a load reduction request on our aggregation of assets. We'll also need to determine how different distributed energy resources, which is DERs, can respond to these events appropriately, and how the addition of simulated assets can affect the overall outcome. We also need to determine the type of demand response strategy that is viable at each location, depending on the load data, the amount of assets, the potential assets, and anything they can utilize. So we're going to be conducting the simulation primarily using Excel, and it will be able to calculate the rewards generated by each program under whatever scenario we assign to it.
The overall goal for our project is to design and develop a simulation example of a virtual power plant using the data given to us by DRNetsoft. However, throughout this semester, we have mainly focused on research and coming up with a design simulation. Our simulation will output a realistic strategy for DRs to respond to a select demand response program. The DER assets will be able to reach the entire system, and hopefully we'll have a simulation by the end of it. Just blinked out. Next slide. So our focus it's on Kaiser Permanente, and they are a medical facility mostly located in California. They exist to provide high quality, affordable healthcare services. They have a multitude of locations, but we are working with 9 of their buildings, and all of them are in California and under the service jurisdiction of PG&E. In this slide, you can see the building types that we have. We have medical centers, medical offices, labs, hospitals, and a data center. You can also see the nameplate capacity of each building separated between solar and fuel cell. So for example, for the first meter, it's we know it's a medical center and it has fuel cell and photovoltaic with the nameplate capacity of 948 and 2000. Now, you can also see our maximum load shedding percentage, and on that, we took a realistic approach and tried to come up with numbers for each type of building. So for medical centers, we believe that they can decrease their energy by 10%.
So since we're looking at the sites we have information on, I'd like to talk about the energy resources that they have available and any considerations that we may have made to in regards to simulating more. So we were provided with a list containing data for 9 metered locations, and 3 of which have exclusively solar, 1 has exclusively fuel cell, and 1 has capacity on both fronts. So as a distributed energy resource, solar photovoltaics are variable in generation and intermittent because they rely on the sunlight. And we're going to be modeling additional solar on meters in order to determine the viability of investing it in the future and see how that cost breaks down. We also want to look at fuel cells because we have those in our suite of assets, and they have a high generation capacity, but by design are not running at 100% all the time. So they're not easily dispatchable, but they are dispatchable, and they can be ramped up to increase generation during an event. So you can see that of those 9, 5 have DER capacity, generation capacity, and 4 actually have no listed capacity whatsoever. But that's kind of the point of the virtual power plant. You want to be able to leverage assets that you have available to reduce load whatever way possible. So one of these strategies could include just reducing your load by not using your air conditioning at the time. So this is why we're considering battery storage, because although some of these do not have the ability to reduce their load by very much, such as labs and hospitals. They have to be reduced, consuming energy all the time. By incorporating some kind of battery storage at a metered location, you open the door to potential demand response strategies such as peak shaving or load shifting. So this suite of assets leaves us with a lot of design opportunities in order to, but in order to do that, we have to conduct a literature review to understand what we're working with. So in our literature review, we covered understanding what a virtual power plant is and how they came about. So each VPP is unique depending on the assets they have available. And some actually have no generation capacity whatsoever and rely solely on like IoT technology that can help them tap into and turn off smart devices like water heaters and dishwashers. In our case, we do have generation capacity. So we have to make assumptions about things like being able to control the demand reduction or the load reduction. So it's all about managing your assets in the most efficient way possible. We also covered FERC Order 2222, which was essentially the government's permission slip that allows the DERs to participate in the wholesale markets through aggregations. It opens the US wholesale markets to new sources of energy that provide greater flexibility and grid resilience. And we also covered DER types that we just discussed to get a better understanding of their limitations and dove into the requirements behind each one. We also looked at the tariffs involved in meter data that we have available and got an understanding of the electric rates and how we can incorporate them into the simulation. And we came up with a suite of demand response strategies that that are essential for operating a virtual power plant, such as load shedding, shifting, shaving, or increasing generation. And finally, we looked into the demand response program offered by PG&E and SoCal Edison, which are two of the major utilities offered in California, to get an understanding of how they work. So these are the three demand response programs that we thought were the most applicable to the data we have. And here you can see the pros and cons of each one, but basically we have to make a decision to focus on one of these to model our simulation at first. And then in order to do that, we need to run some preliminary calculations on just the data that we have available.
Talking about the data, this is for each of our 9 buildings, we have received data for the whole year of 2020. It was separated under imports, or how much energy is coming in the building, exports, or how much energy they're giving back to the grid. And then we also have photovoltaic and fuel cell generation. The data that we have received were in 15 minutes interval for a whole year. So it was very hard to understand because it was so vast. And in the next slide, you can see our approach to better understand the data. So the first thing that we did was to create a Sankey chart with the data for the whole year. We have added the amount of fuel cells or the amount of imported energy for that whole year and have placed into this graph. And what this graph can tell you is that our fuel cells are generating a lot more energy than our photovoltaics, and we're also importing a lot more energy than we're exporting, which makes a good case for a virtual power plant.
So further into our data visualization, we can see here, we kind of have a brief overview of the total energy generated by our available assets in megawatt hours. So overall, our fuel cells are dominating in generation, as you can see in the bottom graph, because they're just providing a base load for the buildings that require their assistance, but they're not operating at their nameplate capacities, and they can be increased a little bit. They do this by design because they're on power purchase agreements. So when they export power, they're selling it back to the grid at a rate less than what they pay for it. So they're losing money. And the same goes for solar, which takes up most of the exports because they don't really have control over how much their panels generate. That's all really up to nature. In terms of imports and exports, here you can see the same kind of summary for the imports and exports over the entire system. So during the summer and winter, those are the peak seasons. They're exporting significantly less than the spring and the fall, which is expected. The imports are varying drastically between meters. They're varying drastically over the year, with meters 4 and 7 consuming the most energy by far. And they need to be looked at with a higher priority, but ultimately our decision is made depending on where the DER assets are and what capacities they have. Important thing here is to note how the total imports fluctuate over the entire year. So in this case, you can see that the difference is by almost 1,000 megawatts per season. And that is probably not very desirable for the base interruptible program, which does not allow monthly nominations. So when we have to keep that in consideration in our minds when we're considering which program we have to model against. Now onto the gross load. This is also a very important metric to determine the demand response strategy across the entire system. So these 2 days are historically the hottest days of the year. And you can see how our gross load for the entire system varies over those 2 days. The yellow line is what we'd have to reduce. And with our given assets, 85% reduction, which is required by the base interruptible program, may not be a feasible goal for an extended period of time. So with that being said, that has led us to choose the capacity bidding program solely due to its flexibility. It's going to give us a lot more freedom to design, and we believe that this could put together a good simulation that we could build on in the future. Although the rewards weren't immediately better based on just looking at the data we have, we do not believe that we could reduce by 85% for the base interruptible program because we have things like hospitals and data centers and labs which are constantly using energy. So we're likely to revisit the base interruptible program in the future when we simulate more DER assets, but for right now, we're doing the capacity bidding program. So now we're going to go talk about our methodology in designing different aspects of the simulation and give you guys a better understanding of the capacity bidding program. So to get us on the same page, I'm going to go over some of the specifics. So the capacity bidding program is an aggregator managed program that provides event notices 1 day in advance. It runs from May 1st to October 31st, and there are a lot of different participation levels that you can sign up for. So under the basic participation level, there's no more than 30 event hours per month, and there will be no more than 5 events per month. Additionally, events can only occur on weekdays. So increasing your participation level allows you to take on more event hours to receive more rewards. And these events are triggered by certain criteria defined by PG&E or the KYSO. So these events happen when the day-ahead market price exceeds $95 per megawatt hour, which means the demand is just too high. But they can also occur whenever KYSO or PG&E deem it necessary if there's some kind of energy-intensive situation happening, like in the area.
So because we have the data from 2020, we can look at the day-ahead market prices for that year, which is what would cause the event to be triggered. And in this graph, you can see the historical KYSO day-ahead price data. And the red line represents the $95 per megawatt hour. So any day that that threshold's breached, it triggers an event that we're simulating. On our research, we have learned the 3 main strategies to respond to a demand response event. Those are load shedding, or diminishing the amount of energy used, increasing generation that can be done by us by either adding solar or fuel cells into the simulation, and load shifting, which can be accomplished with energy storage technology. The 2 that we're focusing on this semester are load shedding and increasing generation, while for next semester, we're doing load shifting and working with batteries. So load shedding, again, can be described as diminishing the amount of energy consumed. And because we have 5 different types of buildings, we have decided based on a realistic approach how much energy those buildings can shed. So you can see the medical centers, we believe that they can shed 10% of their energy, while medical offices are the ones that we believe can shed most of their energy by about 15%. And data centers would be the ones that can really decrease a lot of their energy consumed. We have applied that to the whole month of August, and this graph underneath shows August 1st and the difference load shedding can do. That's about 700 to 1,000 kilowatt difference. And in the next slide, we have applied that to the whole month of August, and it gave us a 8.3% difference in how much energy we're using for that month.
So under our next strategy, which is load shifting, with our current assets, load shifting and load shaving are workable, but we want to develop this kind of in tandem with simulating battery storage units. So we'd also need to make some heavy assumptions on the availability of different buildings to be able to shift operations to other times of the day, which is how load shifting works. But if battery storage were implemented, it would make shifting these loads kind of easier, and it would give us some balance to work within. So it's something we're going to be working on next semester, and we plan to score how much we need, which meters will benefit the most, and those are important things to know because batteries are expensive, but they're really worthwhile. And another one of our demand response strategies is increasing the generation. So this is our final strategy, and it would be with our current assets, we're only really able to ramp up our fuel cell production, but they're not easily dispatchable. So you kind of need a few hours in advance because of design limitations. But once they're running at their nameplate capacity, they can generate an additional 12 to 1400 kilowatts at any given moment during the across the entire aggregation. So that chart below, it details our overall demand response capacity over the course of one day, employing the strategies that we just talked about. And this is, again, with no additional simulated resources, which is something we want to develop further next semester.
So we don't really count solar has increased generation because it's really intermittent by design, but we thought it would be good to simulate what would be like if all the buildings did have solar. So right now the solar simulation is based on the average from the buildings that do have solar, but we do plan on doing have a more reasonable approach with our future work with SAM, or the system advisory model. You can see that by adding solars in all the buildings that don't have solar right now would decrease the number of imports by 2,500 kilowatt hour. And that's again, August 1st, 2020. In the next slide, we took off the whole month of August, and we found an average change of 5.45%. And well, the buildings that we did add solar were buildings 2, 3, 4, 8, and 9. So we were able to decrease the imports by a lot.
All right. So in terms of calculating the actual outcome of our simulation, these are some steps that need to be taken. So first, we need to calculate the monthly nomination and score the response from our aggregation. Then we need to calculate the reward, the penalty, and the energy payment, and then finally repeat with any additional simulated assets. So I guess nominations, this graph below, they're based on a demand response capacity at that hour on weekdays or weekends over the entire month. So that's averaged over the hours of that month and compared against the service agreement baseline, which is defined by PG&E to determine the reward. The baseline is defined as the average load for the corresponding hour over the immediate past 10 similar weekdays prior to an event. It's a lot, but it's essentially the load during each corresponding of those 10 days is averaged to calculate a baseline for that hour. And from there, we can actually give you some kind of result from the calculations that we've just done. So by inputting the data into the blue cells, you can simulate an event that's running. Here it says that the event is running on August 15th with a 4-hour duration that starts at 3 p.m. And we assumed a maximum participation of 30 hours. And since it's August, the capacity price that's defined by PG&E is $22.54 per kilowatt hour. And that provides us with a reward of about $4,400. And we got a reward because we exceeded the nomination, or our nomination exceeded the baseline during those hours. And we're still working on the energy payment because we need to develop the simulation further. It needs to incorporate things like local pricing nodes. But we've verified that this is like a feasible outcome. So I feel like we're on the right track. So in terms of next steps, we have a lot of work to do before the simulation can provide the results that we want, but we have an action plan for our final phase, which is really the development phase. And that these are the steps. So we're going to have to develop the simulation further by creating more in-depth models that include rate information that can accept more meter data based on the service area. And we need to have a better way to assess our results. So currently our demand response reward is our success criteria, but once we start simulating additional assets, we're going to need to give tangible feedback on things like costs. And then we need to assess the financials. So this includes modeling other demand response programs, incorporating local pricing, and this will just be able to give us a more accurate reward model, and we will be able to develop payback periods for simulated assets.
Oh, thank you, and we're open to questions now.
Okay, thank you, Anna and Liam. Questions for the team one? We've got
Hi, it's
some
John
time for
McCauley.
questions.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Hi. Thank you for your presentation. What are the buildings? What benefits are they giving up when you ask them to load shed? Is it mostly air conditioning? In other words, is just the room temperature goes up, or is it something else?
A lot of the time, it would be something like air conditioning. In some buildings, like data centers, we really don't have that much flexibility. So
Right.
it's like a lot of computers and things like labs, they're consistently doing tests. But in
Right.
places like medical offices, like the big offenders are generally things like heating and cooling.
Right. And the reward payment in your simulation, is that the payment you would get from the ISO program, or does that include any kind of bill savings by not using kilowatt hours? Or do you assume that there aren't bill savings because once you stop with the interruption, you have to cool down the heated room anyway?
So I guess to answer your question, with this specific like schedule provided by PG&E, the energy payment, I believe, is kind of a different rate that you have to calculate, and the reward that we calculated is just what we would get from PG&E, what the aggregation would get as a reward from the utility, and that's defined in as a set of calculations in their electric schedule. So we still want to further our financial modeling, because like there's a lot of different tariffs involved in each one of the different meters, and they
Right.
are different like sublaps, because they're not all in one city. There's like ones all the way in Fresno, which totally is going to change the way that the rates work. But that's something we definitely would need to be looking into, and we are going to be modeling that further next semester.
Okay, thank you.
Hey, this is Revis. May I ask a question?
Yes, Revs, go ahead.
So I think I understand how the reward payment concept is working, and based on the estimates of how much the load can be reduced in these different facilities that are being modeled. The question I have is more from a utility and ISO perspective. Is there or will there be an attempt to estimate the level of load shedding and shifting that would have to be achieved to make it desirable from a system-wide perspective, from a reliability perspective? Is that something we looked at as part of this work?
So well, Anna, do you want to?
Actually, could you just repeat the question? I don't think I understood you very well.
Sure. So what you've looked at these different facilities in Kaiser, and you've estimated the amount of load reduction they could absorb, and then based on that, you're doing simulations and calculations and looking at the economic impacts of that. That's really interesting and good. And thanks for the presentation. The question I was thinking about was more from a system-wide perspective, the point of view of the utility company, the ISO. The levels of load reduction that they may want to achieve at any given time might be driven by system-wide considerations for overall reliability. And therefore, the levels of reduction they may be looking for could be different than what the buildings can absorb. What I'm mostly interested in is whether or not the strategy of relying on distributed resources to help accomplish this load reduction, is there a sort of a minimum level of load shedding or shifting that would be needed to make it valuable enough for the power company or the ISO to rely upon this approach to accomplish the load shedding or load shifting? Is there going to be an investigation of how much load shedding and shifting is needed from a system perspective to make it economically viable as a tool to the ISO and the utility? That was the question.
Okay, so for the program that we're using, the demand response program, you can make like monthly bids. So you can tell them how much you think you are going to be able to decrease your energy consumption that month. They can accept or deny that, but like you do that in a monthly basis.
And I guess also in terms of modeling it from the system operator's perspective, I get the scope of our project. We are doing it all within the assets that we have available and like kind of just as an aggregator. So we will be modeling many different types or many different levels of load reduction to just kind of see like a sensitivity analysis to see how it works. But we will be able to determine a kind of threshold depending on like the day and the time, things like that, to determine what our maximum and minimums are that can give a better like resiliency estimate. But yeah, it's definitely something we should look into further because it would be a lot more beneficial to have some actionable outcomes for that.
I'll just add one small comment and stop. I think it would be valuable to look in that direction simply because I think prior research is showing that for increasing levels of non-dispatchable assets, obviously solar and wind primarily, the levels of those deployments will rise to a level where the levels of the challenges for system reliability may rise to much higher levels than say a 5% reduction or a 10% reduction for a given facility. So investigating the system perspective could be highly valuable, I think, given that you're developing a simulation. So that's just a comment.
Thank you.
Well, thanks, Revis. You know, I think the students may not have been exposed to what this overall strategy would be from a utility standpoint. You know, they're basically in a transactive mode, like, this is what I want, can you give it to me? But I think you're absolutely right on point. Like, what is the overall strategy? What does the utility want to accomplish by going through this process?
Yeah, Rudy, it's Alberto Colombo. Hi, it's Dernesoft CEO. I just want to add that the project has been working on existing programs. So the utility has already done this kind of consideration. But the value of this model will be also to forecast. So the utility will be able to use the aggregated data to then design the next 2 or 3 years of system capacity. So I think that would be really the next step in terms of our projects would be to forecast. So using all historical data and all these machine learning technique to forecast future, let's say, supply on behind the meter resources.
Thanks, Alberto. I think in the interest of time, let's just continue on. We'll have time at the end for overarching questions at the end of all the presentations.
Okay.
Thank
Yeah,
you,
Rudy,
Anna
when you're
and
done,
Leanne.
I'll save to the end. I had a couple questions.
Okay. So the next speaker is team 2. That would be Matt O'Brien. Matt, you're on.
All right, 1 moment. So my project is also a virtual power plant, but this one will be happening on our campus at Lehigh University. Also sponsored by Dernesoft as well. So some of our goals for the project, we want to conduct some standard background research on what a virtual power plant is, as well as what Lehigh's sustainability and energy goals are in the next 5-10 years and how this project can help the university attain them. We're going to try to collect the energy usage data for all the buildings on campus, identify the inefficiencies in this energy usage, look into the potential for distributed energy resources that we can implement into the campus and help provide power and work with our virtual power plant. And then, like the other group, we're going to send a simulation that participates in utility response programs. And then finally, once we've run the simulations, collected all of our data, we're going to analyze the operational, financial, and resilience impacts, seeing if Lehigh is a feasible option to turn into a virtual power plant. So kind of the scope for this semester, we started off with some background research on the virtual power plants, look into the sustainability goals, the resources that we currently have on campus. There are some solar panels on campus. There's electric vehicle charging stations, but in very small numbers right now. Then we had the data collection step, working with the facilities department to look into the building names, their square footage, and kind of their day-to-day usages. Using the DernetSoft website interface, we created all the buildings on campus, looked into the PPL metered accounts for how much energy we are purchasing from the utility. We get baseline results, look into the individual building data, and compare that to the PPL data. And then finally, we analyze what we have currently. And then next semester and over winter break, begin planning the virtual power plant simulations to see how our grid would respond. So as we heard before, DernetSoft is the project sponsor for this. They're dedicated to digital transformation of the energy industry, especially through distributed energy resources. So earlier, the project with Kaiser Permanente, experts in on-site solar, various things like that. So what is a virtual power plant? So it's the aggregation of different distributed energy resources or buildings for purposes such as power generation, ancillary service, and demand reduction. And then they can sell the energy back to the grid at any time if we're not using it. Excuse me. Stabilizes the grid so that during those peak demand times, there's not an overload of generation and is able to provide stability for the grid. And then our campus becomes more efficient because we can look at specific buildings and see how they're using their energy at certain times. How can we improve the efficiency of these buildings so that during the peak demand times, some buildings can be shut off or lower their energy usages, transfer that energy to other buildings. And then when the campus does have a high peak in energy demand, when they need to draw more power, we can look into different scenarios to maybe not buy it from the utility, but provide it ourselves from other sources. So our first major step was to collect information on everything at Lehigh University. So thanks to the facilities department, the ESE department, we were able to get the names, the square footage, and what the occupational usage are for all the buildings. Now there's about 140 to 150 buildings at Lehigh University, and every single one of them has an individual shark meter to it. So this monitors their energy usage, whether it be kilowatt hours, watts, power factor, current, load, etc. We'll dive into that a little bit later. But we needed this individual building data because we can look into the inefficiencies and see which sites are optimal to put in assets and market participation and ways we can, make these buildings better. So down below is an example of 4 of our buildings that we have on campus that we have in an Excel sheet. So we have the meter name, the influx DB. And then in order to make it easier for us, we made an actual building name. So all of these are fraternities or sororities that are listed and their overall building number on campus, their square footage, and then hidden, but it's what their building usage is. Additionally, the meter type there is a couple buildings have multiple meters to it. For example, the one library has a computing center attached that has its own separate sub-meter. So we can look into that as well to see which aspects of some buildings are drawing more energy. So like a computing center with all the computer servers, et cetera, is probably going to draw more energy than the library that just has lights and other resources like that. So DernetSoft gave us access to their website interface. to input all the buildings. So as you can see below, we inputted in the building name and its address. That's going to become important when we add in utility demand response programs as well, so we know the actual physical location of where we're sending the energy. Not listed is the square footage, but it's put in there as well. And then we categorize each building into 4 major categories. So residential, so that's the dorms, the fraternity sorority buildings, any small apartment buildings that Lehigh owns, any housing. And then there's small offices, so 1 to 2 floors. There's a couple small old buildings scattered around Lehigh. There's the philosophy building, the dialogue center, etc. There are only 1 to 2 floors. So we have those listed. Medium office buildings are things like, if you know the campus, the Alumni Memorial Building or the New Street Building, anywhere from 3 to 6 floors of office. And then finally, we have secondary schools. So these are all the academic uses. These are the lecture halls, the research buildings, any campus life, etc. And knowing this is important because each of these has a demand time different throughout the day. So for example, the lecture halls probably don't need power at 10 p.m., 11 p.m., but the residential halls will. So we can look into those and see where the spikes in the usage are. So we have all these buildings in, and we can look for simulations on each building's load. Like I said, we have over 100 buildings listed in the database. So I mentioned before with the Lehigh Shark Meter, every individual building has a shark meter attached to it, and using this interface that Leah has provided for us, we're able to see the real-time energy usage. So it's the kilowatt hours of each building and when the spikes are. So as you can see, for example, this one's the library over a 24-hour period. There's some spikes, but a lot of stability as well. So we got to look into why is that ramping up, how is it ramping up, and what we can do. So this data is going to be used to simulate each building's response, and we can download into a CSV sheet. And then once we have that data in a CSV sheet, we can put each shark meter with the building that we have in the DernetSoft website. And currently, we've been working through that data. It's been a major hurdle for the semester. Like I said, there's 140 buildings. We could download each of these individually, but we're trying to find a way to download it in bulk so we can upload it quickly to the website and then start running our simulations. Now, the plan is to download 2 years of data. This has information going back almost 5 years, but we figured due to COVID and the campus being shut down for most of 2020, we figured data from 2019 and 2021 would be ideal so we can see what energy the campus is actually using. So completely separate from the individual buildings, we also got data from PPL. So PPL provides a 15-minute interval data for 9 different accounts, all owned by Lehigh. The facilities department worked with us to look through these 9 accounts and gave us 8 others that they thought were ideal besides the substation account. So that's the main account that PPL charges Lehigh for, and that makes up almost 90% of the energy used on campus. This includes the lower campus on South Mountain, as well as the Mountaintop campus. But there's other important buildings that we have, such as the stadium, which is going to draw a lot of energy, specifically the electric bus charger as well. This will be important when we're doing electric vehicle charging simulations and trying to see if we can use them as batteries. Recently, Lehigh announced that they're working on a solar field over at Goodman campus. This is in its early planning stages. I believe it just got approval from the Homeowners Association to kind of keep moving forward with the project. So when that's eventually created, that's going to be a large energy draw as well. Again, it's another DER, so that's going to help the power plant. And then finally, Moeller Lab. It's a lab on the south side of campus, not connected to the main account, but still an important energy draw. So on the right, we have a couple examples of 2 different accounts that we have and how much energy each one is pulling. And then the key with this data is we're going to take the shark meter data for all the buildings and then compare it to the overall PPL data that we're getting. And this is going to help us see what the inefficiencies are on our campus. So right now we're in the data collection stage, but we'd like to have some market participation in it as well. It'd be great just to have all this data in one centralized database, but if you can't do anything with the data, then what's the point? So This data is going to help us create a simulation that helps Lehigh participate in utility demand response. And then the goal is to have this actually happen in the coming years. I'll explain more about the Lehigh sustainability on the next slide, but the goal is for the campus to reduce its energy load and become more efficient. There is a PPL pilot DER program that they just started up last year. They've been implementing smart meters into different DERs and trying to expand that reach throughout the Lehigh Valley. We've been looking into that, but we're still just trying to gather more data because it is in its early pilot phases. And then we have the shark meters that lets us look at each individual building and make it more efficient. We can lower energy prices, meet the sustainability goals. So the goal is we're going to take the PPL data and compare it to the shark meter data and say, okay, if PPL is giving us 100 kilowatt hours, for example, and the shark meter is saying we're only using 95 kilowatt, how are we able to improve the efficiency of these buildings so we're using the energy that we're paying for instead of seeing where it goes to waste. Now, Lehigh has some big sustainability goals that they want to reach within the next 5 to 10 years. The main is reducing our overall CO2 emissions on campus and becoming more energy efficient. So in a recent sustainability brochure sent out to alumni and students and anyone associated with the university, they said that their energy goal is to reduce their energy use by 25% over our 2007 baseline. And the feasibility of this project, if it's successful, it can help the university reach the goals and provide tangible results. A lot of times with these campus-wide initiatives, you hear our goal was 25%, you hear our goal was to reduce by 50%, but a lot of times, excuse me, a lot of times you don't hear about the actual projects that are being done behind the scenes to actually make these goals happen. So this is a big project, if successful, can help the university in achieving these goals. There are other plans for building monitoring, but there's no plans to use that system then to improve the building efficiency. An example of this is there's going to be an energy and water dashboard project. They're monitoring key performance indicators of energy spikes and water usage. They're doing an interactive user-friendly graphic user, interactive graphic user interface, and can help the common user see where our energy is being used on campus. That's in its early stages right now in the computer science and business department. So they've been spending the semester working on the programming to get the platform and map up and running. Sorry. So this is a 2-semester project. So we've been spending the semester gathering the data, meeting with different departments on Lehigh, and compiling everything together on the DernetSoft website. So now that we have all this data gathered, we can begin to see some results on campus. So like I said, we can compare the building efficiencies. How's the shark meter data that we're getting compared to the total PPL is giving us. Additionally, much like the other project, we're going to run through some various virtual power plant scenarios. What happens if we add in that solar field or add in solar to different areas on campus? During peak demand time, can we use the electric vehicle charging stations as batteries? And then just looking into how we can send energy from different buildings to reduce our overall energy load. Some buildings on campus you can't get into at night, they're locked, but you walk by and you see the lights are still heavily on. So how can we send that energy to other buildings during that time? And then finally, the energy dashboard project is getting off the ground slowly. So once their interface is up, they're going to be getting the data in real time, and we can use that data to help our power plant and our scenarios. That's all I have. And thank the ESE department, the facilities department for providing the research, and DernetSoft as well. Open to all questions. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Matt. And Matt is an expert user of time. We got about 30 seconds for questions for Matt.
I have one, Rudy. Do you or does Lehigh have financial targets for its energy management program in addition to CO2 reduction?
Great question. I'm sure they do. Through my research, I haven't seen anything yet publicly that they've been announcing for it. Yeah,
Okay.
I'm sure they do as well.
Yeah, I mean, you know, one thing to keep in mind as you do these projects, I mean, folks, I know a lot of organizations have CO2 goal reductions, but they also, my experience is that they want to know where whether something's going to cost more to get it or whether they're going to make money by doing this or break even. But so I would say just keep that in mind as you study these things more for virtual power plants and load reduction programs and selling into the wholesale market.
And I can add to that, John. So Catherine Target Gross, I'm the sustainability officer here at Lehigh.
Hey, how
I just
are you?
returned, I just returned from leave. So I'm getting caught up, but we will, to answer your question, so we are about to release a climate action strategy, which will establish a carbon neutrality goal for the institution. And we worked with the Stonehouse Group on a lot of the technical analysis. And so we've done an energy capital investment plan, and we have really solid estimates for what some of these things will cost, what the savings will be, sort of what that ROI looks like. So we'll be able to share more of that shortly. Stay tuned. So it's currently with senior leadership. So
congratulations on your solar plant site. Last time we talked, it was going to be in Texas, I think.
Well, we do. No, we still have a virtual one, but yeah, we do have an on campus as well.
Cool.
So
thank you.
Yeah. So Matt, I can be in touch with you too as that gets approved. So
yeah, great. So
thank you. Thank you, Matt.
No problem. Yeah, we can definitely meet Catherine this week. Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine, and thank you, Matt. Thank you, John. All right, let's get on to team number 3. I think that's nuclear power and climate change. And as Jose is setting up, nuclear energy is getting a lot of attention as a big piece of our asset to meet climate change issues. And we had a great presentation 2 days ago from Tina Taylor with EPRI, who is the project industry lead too. So Jose's topic is very much in discussion these days. Jose, you're on.
Okay, let me pull up the presentation in a second. Rudy, I don't think I'm able to share my screen.
You're unable to share your screen. Let me.
I have you as co-host, so you should be able to
you're
share.
co-host.
Okay, perfect. Okay. Thank you all for joining. My name is Jose Suarez, and my capstone research for this semester, part 1 of my capstone research was around the clean energy alternative that the nuclear energy brings, specifically for Pennsylvania. And I want to thank in advance Tina Taylor. She was my EPRI advisor throughout the semester, and for Professor Rudy. Okay, start things off. Now, this research effort presents a comparison of levelized costs of electricity for contemporary fossil fuel plants and the anticipated LCOEs for similar scale nuclear counterparts, and enumerates potential incentives required to allow forthcoming advanced nuclear technology to become a more viable alternative to fossil fuel dependency, again, particularly in Pennsylvania. So a quick run through of this research effort. So I created an inventory of the existing fossil fuel plants in Pennsylvania. I outlined current plans for plant deactivations and new plant constructions. And then I followed that up with developing LCOE models for future or anticipated fossil fuel plant build-outs. For instance, ultra supercritical coal plants and high efficiency combined cycle natural gas plants. And both of these would have 90% carbon capture, because I wanted the comparison against nuclear to be, as close to an equivalent comparison as possible. Then I followed that up with developing an LCOE for advanced reactor plants using trisul fuel technology. I'll get into more detail what that means, but this is a specific technology within the advanced reactor technology, anticipated advanced reactor technology that uses a particular form of processed uranium, unlike some of the other advanced reactors being developed, and it offers plenty of benefits from safety, cost, reliability, versatility. And I present results, specifically the different LCOEs evaluated. And, I close that up with conclusions and the next steps moving forward for next semester of my part 2 of my capstone. Okay, so the current energy mix in Pennsylvania. According to the Energy Information Association, the EIA, Pennsylvania consumed approximately 2,051 trillion BTUs in 2019, and through its industrial, commercial, residential, and transportation sectors. Roughly 54% of that energy was utilized directly by the power sector to generate electricity. And coincidentally, 54% of that energy consumed by power generating plants derived exclusively from natural gas and coal. So, a lot of carbon emitting sources being utilized still to this day in Pennsylvania. Here is a graph of the existing installed capacity taken from information available at PGM. Total generating capacity in 2019 was 44,705 megawatts, and that's distributed across plenty of different types of non-renewable and renewable sources. But specifically, again, this is focused on natural gas plants and coal plants. So there were about 42 commissioned and active natural gas plants and 18 coal plants still in operation. Load forecasting, as part of integrated resource plans, and these vary state by state because they're not federally mandated, but Pennsylvania does issue an annual report that lists the condition of its assets, predicts growth rates in their load, and as well as plans for the expansion or the upkeep of their utility or power generation fleet. Now, based on information available from PJM, which is the system operator for all utilities in Pennsylvania, and it does cross some state line borders, but again, this is information specifically for Pennsylvania. They list the Pennsylvania load growth rate between 0.2% and 0.9% annually over the next 10 years. And again, this may not seem like a lot, but they do still rely heavily on coal. So this isn't a clean burning fuel that's being sourced and used. Between that period, taking an average growth rate, you see a peak load increase of about 1.5 thousand megawatts over this 10-year period. And this is already factoring in all of their demand response, energy efficiency measures being taken already by the top 10, 11 utilities across Pennsylvania. So, you know, those energy efficiency efforts are just not cutting it. Now, new interconnection plans, most of the new generation capacity is natural gas. There's an average increase of 15% over the last 4 years in new gas plant installs. Approximately 2,000 megawatts of average capacity replenishment by natural gas year in, year out. And that's basically laid bare here in this graph, this bar graph. The darker shade of gray is the coal capacity, the installed capacity available in Pennsylvania in 2017 through 2020, and then the yellow, of course, is natural gas. And as you can see, you know, although coal, it's moving in the right direction, which is, you know, decreasing in available capacity, natural gas is increasing. And again, it is a cleaner form of source of fuel, but it still has a good amount of embedded CO2 when burned. Now, again, this is another table taken from the PJM infrastructure, annual infrastructure outlook report that they issue again on an annual basis. It takes stock of utilities across Pennsylvania and their specific deactivation plans or deactivation requests, and additional interconnection requests and projects under construction throughout the state, and they divvy it up pretty nicely between non-renewable and renewable resources. So again, harping back to how reliant Pennsylvania is on natural gas, you could see that there's about 27 projects totaling 2,210 megawatts of capacity being, you know, in the process of being constructed in Pennsylvania. Now, entering the levelized cost of electricity for these anticipated natural gas and coal plants. Based on deactivation notifications received by PJM between 2017 and 2020, the average plant size being removed and replaced with more modern plants are 500 to 800 megawatts. Now, these plants do not include carbon capture storage technology, but based on an EIA analysis outlined here below in this table, you know, they do anticipate that moving forward, a lot of the American gas and more specifically the coal power plant fleet will be retrofitted with carbon capture storage technology, upwards of 85 to 90% of carbon capture capability. And they list the first available year for these particular technologies. I have here highlighted natural gas, but we also have ultra supercritical coal at 90% carbon capture, made available hopefully by 2024 and 2023 respectively. And basically what this does is, you know, it captures you know, GHG emissions, specifically CO2, and they just you know, stores the CO2 underneath the plant in geological formations. Okay, and these are some model parameters that I used in my Excel spreadsheet model. Again, it's ultra supercritical coal with 90% carbon capture and combined cycle with 90% carbon capture. The fuel was natural gas. The plant scale was 600 megawatts. The reason why is, again, this is the average size of the plants being decommissioned or taken out of service and overhauled, you know, with newer technology, and also, you know, a lot of the anticipated available advanced nuclear reactors are going to be in order of magnitude between 250 to 300 megawatts. That's why they call them small modular reactors. But, and I don't want to get too much into the benefits of those just yet, but they are scalable. So you could double up on a module for nuclear reactor and make it an equivalent size plant to both of these modeled. All right. Specifically,
Less
the
than 4
levelized.
minutes, Jose.
Okay, so the levelized cost of electricity. You know, again, just going over some of the calculations that I utilize, and this was all information extrapolated from that table mentioned previously. You know, specifically the heat rate efficiencies, fixed operations and maintenance. Those are in dollars per kilowatt year, variable in them, and overnight capital costs. And then the LCOEs at the very end here, and they're presented more clearly in the results section. And I actually changed them from dollars over kWh to dollars over megawatt hours. Some more information here. You can already start seeing that, you know, it's a little bit straightforward, but natural gas is the cheaper option between the two. Now, you know, presenting advanced decarbonization with advanced nuclear reactor. Nuclear power still to this day remains as one of the only sources for 100% clean energy. And moreover, U.S. Department of Energy has invested approximately $3.2 billion in advanced reactor demonstration programs. Some of those programs or conceptual designs are listed here. These are snippets taken from the DOE website. There are vast benefits in advanced reactors, you know, including safety, cost, versatility, efficiency. But specifically, I wanted to get into, again, the advanced reactors implementing TRISO fuel pebbles. Now, these pebbles, the picture shown here, they are different from regular fuel rods, and they allow for, this technology allows for an advanced reactor to operate continuously throughout the life of the plant or perhaps the vessel, you know, so really lowering those shutdown or outage times that really place a heavy financial burden on a power plant. And those are called cycle lengths. So basically, I remove the cost of outage in my LCOE for advanced nuclear. Some other benefits, again, that are not seen with, you know, our current nuclear fleet is on-site interim storage of spent fuel. So there is space allocated in these plants for, you know, on-site storage. And then, you know, molten salt reactors, which are, you know, use salt as coolant. They allow for operations under lower pressures and higher temperatures as compared with, you know, again, current day reactors, which operate at high water pressures, and these all drive capital costs up when building. All right, specifically, and not much work has been done on this. This is where I start to split off between available information, is the cost of fuel. Not a lot of work has been done with TRISO fuel pebbles and analyzing the fuel costs. But I did find a study, actually, again, thanks to Tina Taylor, a study performed by Georgia Institute of Technology, where they essentially equated the fuel cost of TRISO pebble to the cost of enriching the uranium contained in the pebble, and you add the cost of fabrication. So you have to press those pebbles into form. You know, combined with anticipated plant efficiency and burnup, this yields a fuel cost for an LCOE model of nuclear. Getting into this, again, this is more the crux of what was shown before for the fossil fuel options. I want to get very quickly into the results. I know I don't have too much time left. You know, using the RAND function on Excel, I was able to model this 250 times, and these are my results for coal, natural gas, nuclear. So as expected, coal is still very much no longer a viable player in the power generation realm, which is a good thing. But natural gas is basically head in head with or toe to toe with the anticipated nuclear costs. Again, this is specifically advanced nuclear reactors implementing TRISO as a fuel source. Okay. Now, this right here is you know, tabulation of CO2 equivalent emitted by these three different power plants. Now, there's a corrective value here because of the carbon capture. So if you remove 90% on each of these, this is the total emitted CO2 into the atmosphere, and nuclear obviously is zero. If we continue the business as usual course of things, this is essentially the cost of a plant in addition to the annual fuel cost. So how I calculated the annual fuel cost was, I multiplied the values that we saw up here times the capacity of the plant and the hours in the year, 8760. It's very clear that nuclear is by far more expensive than natural gas, but it's getting close with coal. There is an existing credit right now available by a bipartisan bill that was passed in 2018, I believe, which offers a $50 per ton CO2 avoided credit. With that drops down, coal price, gas price, specifically nuclear prices significantly. So now there's only about a $150–200 million disparity between a similar sized nuclear plant and coal plant. If we remove giving credit to these, or actually, let me reword that. If we give credits only to carbon-free sources, again, we're inching closer to making nuclear a more viable option. Now, conclusions and next steps. Again, unfortunately, it is still very, very much, very expensive to build up or make the business case for a nuclear plant. Variables such as storage costs and outage times have higher values of uncertainty. Specifically, in an effort to make this an apples to apples comparison, I didn't eliminate the storage costs entirely, but if I had, there's still going to be some level of cost intrinsic to transporting fuel, maybe passing it down to the DOE or any other agency that handles spent fuel. But it should be noted that it's still better than conventional nuclear LCOE, which is currently at $97 per megawatt hour. And this kind of sort of paints a different picture. A lot of the advanced reactors, their business model has them listed as going after natural gas plants. Well, my research, although it didn't prove otherwise, it did show that going after coal plants, or specifically coal plant retrofits, would be a more cost competitive or attractive option. And then again, a lot of information available is still limited. I don't want to call it conjecture, but it is limited due to most projects still being in the R&D phase. Now, for next semester, available nuclear options for the steel industry. I want to analyze the outcomes of using the thermal energy contained in nuclear reactors, specifically for the steel industry in Pennsylvania. What I envision is analyzing thermal energy from nuclear reactors to derive clean hydrogen by way of an electrolyzer. So this is an alternative way of smelting iron, right? And this is called specifically sponge iron. So as I mentioned before, salt is used as a coolant for these fluoride high temperature reactors. We're talking about temperatures north of 800 degrees Celsius, and this is all a lot of thermal energy that can be used to create a clean form of steel manufacturing. And that is the conclusion of my presentation. Any questions?
You have time for one or two questions.
Ramesh is Revis. It's kind of maybe a question in terms of whether some of these factors were addressed, but also it can be interpreted as simply a comment. Obviously, a lot of work's been done on levelized cost of electricity as a figure of merit for comparing different technologies. EPRI, Lazard, many have done that. I think I could pose this as a question, but it could also be the suggestion for future directions. I think the challenge is to go beyond LCOE an attempt to look at how to model the value of availability and contribution to grid reliability and the value of decoupling generation consumption by virtue of capabilities like generating hydrogen. If those types of values could be assigned some sort of monetary value, even if it's an initial step in that direction, a more integrated model of asset value could be looked at. That is an area I think is really lacking attention. The LCOE as figure by itself is heavily researched already. So that's just if it's already been addressed, I'd be interested in hearing the comment on that, but that's a suggestion.
No,
It's a terrific idea. Yes. Jose.
Yeah, I totally agree with that analysis. Thanks for the comment, Revis. You know, again, in an effort for me to make an equal comparison between the fossil fuel plants, new fossil fuel plants being developed and advanced nuclear reactors. Not all advanced reactors are being made equally. So specific, you know, there wasn't a lot of resources available that I could just, you know, extrapolate the cost of fuel for those making or utilizing TRISO fuel pebbles. This, you know, it's a particular technology that only about 3 to 4 different startups are utilizing at the current time. But I did find some limitations with the LCOE model. You know, I gave a concerted effort in making this an apples to apples comparison, but maybe it still isn't because the LCOE model may not be the best approach to take when comparing you know, these types of fossil fuel plants with new technology, right? Again, we're fabricating a new type of fuel. So you know, rules are being basically rewritten, right? The wheel is being reinvented in a sense. I do agree, you know, maybe a deeper dive needs to be had on analyzing the financials behind advanced nuclear.
Well, thank you, Jose.
Sorry, Rudy. I just have one suggestion for future, because nuclear is such a hot button issue, and it's really, you know, next generation nuclear is new technology compared to this stuff that's relatively established. But think about how all these criteria that we're talking about and how you might put it in some kind of a risk evaluation matrix, because I think that's where the decision making is going to come in. I've heard pros and nuclear is always about convincing people that you've nailed down the safety risk and the cost and the reliability and everything. And there's a handful of people that just don't believe you based on the past. So if you can somehow figure out how to graphically demonstrate an analysis that you know, for people to think about how to take all these things into account as they think through nuclear, I think it would be sort of a fresh look at stuff.
Yes, very good suggestions. And I think, Jose, definitely we need to pursue this. They're excellent suggestions. All right, let's move on to team 4. So a little change in pace. We're going to talk about warehouses, solarizing warehouses, and the proliferation of warehouses in Pennsylvania and neighboring states. And so, Laura, I believe you're next.
Yes, thank you, Professor Shankar. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Laura Marsiglio, and I'll be presenting my research on the technical and economic impacts of solar rooftops on warehouses in Pennsylvania.
See, Laura, you're coming a little rough in the audio. Is that?
Okay, let me grab my other pair of headphones. Sorry. Okay, can you hear me better now?
Yes, it's much better.
Okay.
Thank you.
Excellent. Okay, and can you see my screen?
Yes.
Perfect. So I'd like to start out by thanking John Koslow, my industry sponsor, and the Sustainable Energy Fund. So the main goal of this project is to summarize information that will be essential for warehouse owners that might be looking into rooftop solar as a possibility, with the final deliverable being a user guide summarizing all of the key findings from my research to inform inputs for the system advisory model, which is developed by NREL. So there are 4 key areas of my project scope. The first being a warehouse inventory to understand the size, location, and build a business as usual energy profile for warehouses in Pennsylvania. The second step is a structural analysis to understand what the added load of solar panels would be. Third is policy research, looking into state, local, and federal tax incentives and local net metering policies. And then the fifth and final step is an economic analysis using the system advisory model, SAM, to estimate the costs and returns of the project based on an integration of all of this other research and using that to inform the user guide. So first, why warehouses? As of 2018, warehouses were the most common commercial building type in the United States, and they happen to be an ideal location for solar panels. There's minimal shading because they're high up off the ground. Typically, there aren't a lot of other buildings nearby, and they're high enough up that tree shading isn't a problem. So that maximizes the production of the panels. There's also a large, generally pretty flat surface area on warehouse roofs. So that's conducive to adding solar panels, as you can kind of see in the photo. There's no worry about taking up land for a ground-mounted system that could be used for something else. You're taking advantage of space that's already being used for a building to add solar panels and distributed generation capabilities. And being on rooftops, they're also non-disruptive visually, which can be a benefit in some scenarios, but it also allows the warehouse owner to showcase the panels for their sustainability efforts. So rooftop solar panels have a potential to be appealing to companies as they're facing more pressure to incorporate ESG principles into all aspects of their business practices. We're also seeing some validation in legislation for the viability of rooftop solar panels on warehouses. A few weeks ago, on November 9th, Governor Phil Murphy of New Jersey signed a bill into law that will require all new warehouses over 100,000 square feet to be built solar ready. So reserving 40% of the roof area for solar systems, either photovoltaic or solar thermal systems, and constructed structurally to be solar ready. So anyone from Lehigh or living in the area knows that there's been a lot of discussion about the boom in warehouses. So I wanted to talk a little bit about why it's such a popular location for warehouse developers. One of the first reasons is proximity to major highways, specifically I-78, I-81, and I-76, which is the Pennsylvania Turnpike. You can see in the photo that the Lehigh Valley is about a day's drive from 30% of American consumers by estimates from the New York Times. Cities like New York City, Boston, Philadelphia, Baltimore, which is an important port city, and Washington, D.C. are all pretty close to the Lehigh Valley. So you have that access to population centers and major commerce areas. There's also affordable real estate in Pennsylvania and an abundant workforce to staff these warehouses. And we're seeing a boom across the state. In 2020, there's a proposed 7.9 million square feet of new warehouse projects, which is equivalent to 137 football fields equivalent in land area. And this boom isn't really expected to grow or it's not expected to slow down, as e-commerce retailers are seeing increased demand, partially brought upon by lifestyle changes due to the pandemic. More online shopping will just continue to increase the number of warehouses. So I'm from Pittsburgh, and every time I drive across the state to Lehigh, I feel like I'm passing alternating warehouses and farms on the highway. So it's very obvious to me that there's a high density of warehouses in especially the middle part of the state. So specifically in this study, I'm looking at the counties directly east and west of Harrisburg. So just putting that into context on this map. So for the sake of time, I had a little bit of difficulty finding information about warehouses in the state. So I'm using data for 96 warehouses in Dauphin and Cumberland County from an article in Penn Live about the warehouse boom. So that data included the tenant and the owner of the warehouse, the square footage, and the address. So I mapped these addresses using ArcGIS to understand their distribution across the state and near Harrisburg and Carlisle. And you can see in the photo that they seem to exist in clusters with several warehouses grouped in industrial parks. And oftentimes the same company owns these warehouses. So there's some potential there for tenants located nearby each other with the same warehouse owner to put some pressure on the owner to install rooftop solar panels. So also using this information from Penn Live, I was working on this warehouse inventory, understanding kind of the sizing of these warehouses. And I found that warehouses in the state have an average size of around 440,000 square feet. You can then break that down by the primary use of the warehouse. So non-refrigerated warehouses and distribution centers and refrigerated warehouses. Refrigerated warehouses tend to be a little bit on the smaller side. So that will be an important breakdown when I start to look at energy usage. And then additionally, I put the warehouses into bins based on their size. So this information will help me to carry out some of my cost analyses later on across a wider number of scenarios. Then I went on to use information from Energy Star. This is nationally representative information about the energy use intensity broken down by primary use of the warehouse. So obviously this information is going to vary building by building, but I felt this was a good baseline for the analysis, a good starting point. So you can see, even though refrigerated warehouses have a smaller physical footprint, their energy use is a lot higher, which makes sense because of the energy needed to keep these facilities cool. So using the information about energy use intensity and the average square footage of the warehouses, I went on to estimate average yearly energy consumption. So we can see that ranging from around 7 gigawatt hours per year for non-refrigerated warehouses to 24 gigawatt hours per year for refrigerated warehouses. For context, the average home in Pennsylvania with most recent data was consuming around 10 megawatt hours per year. So warehouses are using 700 to 2,400 times that energy on a yearly basis, which really highlights the potential for environmental impact that adding solar arrays to these facilities could have. So after completing the warehouse inventory part of the project, I moved on to the structural analysis. So I calculated the added wind load of rooftop solar panels according to the American Society of Civil Engineers standard. Each building is designed a little bit differently, so it's difficult to make a generalization about what this added wind load will be. But I broke down some of the parameters for the calculation just to get an idea. And going back to the new New Jersey law, one of the aspects of designing a building to be solar ready entails making sure that it can support the added load, which includes the wind load. It's also possible that existing warehouses may need to be retrofitted to support solar panels, but this is an analysis that's outside the scope of this project and something that Dana and Sarah will touch on later on. So like I mentioned, these calculations vary building to building. You can see in some of the graphics from the standard that there are a lot of different variables that can change. So I used a blueprint from a proposal for a new warehouse in Dauphin County to model some of these calculations to act as a representative building. And I determined that the added wind load, the maximum wind load that needs to be designed for is 50 pounds per square foot added by the solar panels. And NREL estimates that the load of the panels and the racking system themselves ranges between 3 to 6 pounds per square foot. So this is information that would need to be taken to an engineering firm or a solar developer to kind of understand if the existing buildings can support this weight. So moving on to the policy analysis, I looked into tax incentives first. Pennsylvania, unfortunately, does not have any state level tax exemptions for solar, so no property or income tax exemptions for solar projects or tax incentives. So all of the financial incentives for projects in the state will come from the federal investment tax credit, which was established by the Energy Policy Act of 2005. As you can see in this graph, it's been stepping down. It was at 30% now for both residential and commercial systems. It's down to 26% unless companies have safe harbor modules, and it will continue to step down unless additional policy action is taken. So depending on when a company invests in a project, the incentive will continue to decrease in coming years. As far as Pennsylvania specific incentives, there are a lot of loan and grant opportunities, such as the loans that are provided by my project sponsor, the Sustainable Energy Fund. So there is the potential for some financial aid in that way. I then went on to look at net metering policy for PPL because the portion of the state that I'm looking at for this project lies in PPL's territory. In the interest of time, I don't want to explain how net metering works and some of the graphics that I have here, but to summarize, the size of solar systems that can be added on roofs will be constrained by the roof size itself and the usage of the company, but interconnection requirements set additional system size limits. So in Pennsylvania, systems have to be designed not to exceed 110% of the customer's annual electricity consumption, but that's capped at 3 megawatts. So using PV watts to do a quick calculation for specific production in Pennsylvania, an array sized at 3 megawatts could be expected to produce around a little over 3 gigawatt hours per year. So going back to the energy usage for warehouses, maxing out the size of these arrays won't be able to fully displace the energy usage of warehouses. So that's something that will factor into my cost analysis next year. So to talk a little bit more about my plans for next semester, I will be using NREL's SAM program to do some more complex simulations of performance and costs. So these are some examples of the outputs that I'll be able to gain from SAM and some of the insights, looking at monthly energy production and based on electricity rates, the electricity bill before and after a solar system. So these costs will really round out this analysis, and I'll move forward to developing the user guide. So like I mentioned, looking forward to next semester, I'm going to spend some more time building out a business as usual energy consumption profile, looking at the rate schedule for warehouses to understand cost of electricity and load distribution over a 24-hour period and over a whole year. I will use SAM to complete my economic analysis. And finally, I will summarize all of these key metrics to detail what some of the inputs into SAM should be so that interested parties can complete these analyses for their building specific details. Thank you, everyone. And if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Thank you, Laura. Questions for Laura?
Laura, this is John Koslow. I would encourage you to look a little deeper into the net metering regulations, because what you quoted was for third-party ownership. It's completely different regulation if the property owner owns the solar. So
Okay.
that 110% is only for third-party owners, but otherwise your presentation was great. Good job.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I'll definitely look more into net metering and some of those intricacies.
Laura, just a real quick question. I apologize if I missed it at the beginning. What we found is the snow load and the wind load created, and when you add the solar to a lot of the existing warehouse structures, just makes it that they can't handle the load because they're not built for it. Did you factor in that into the economic analysis for this?
Yeah, so understanding what retrofits would be necessary is kind of outside of the scope of this project. Dana and Sarah will present shortly on thin film solar, and so their project details some more information about what's involved in retrofitting existing warehouses. As I mentioned, there's a lot of new construction happening, so the loading will need to be factored into those new structures, which is why I think it's important to kind of highlight.
Ramesh, this is Revis. A quick question. Laura, thank you for the presentation. With respect to the data on the warehouses, the refrigerated and the unrefrigerated warehouses, is any data sharing going on between you and other projects? I was just thinking that these refrigerated warehouses might be of interest as another significant load that would be of interest to the people looking at load reduction and load reduction programs.
Yes, so I could certainly make the data available. It's not something that has been included in the scope of their project so far, but is certainly a possibility.
Okay, thanks. Just a thought.
Any other questions for Laura? If not, we'll, Laura, in fact, introduce the next topic, which would look into more detail, especially accommodating lighter warehouses and thin film arrays. So We have Dana and Sarah who will be talking about this.
Great, thank you.
Sorry, can you guys see my slides? Yes.
Yep.
Awesome. So Sarah and I are working on a project that works really nicely with Laura's project. We're looking at an assessment of lightweight rooftop solar, and this is our mid-project presentation. So Laura already mentioned all the benefits of rooftop solar on warehouses in the Lehigh Valley. And we're looking at a very specific subset of these warehouses that Laura touched on a little bit briefly. There's certain warehouses that don't have the structural capacity to support rooftop solar in its current state. Usually silicon panels are used, and they're fairly heavy. They're 40 pounds for each panel. So if you have a 500 kilowatt array, that's about 50,000 pounds. So it's not something that every warehouse can support. And we're working with Whitman, and we're working specifically, our advisor is John Beaupre, who's the senior vice president. They're an engineering, environmental, and renewable energy consulting company in the Lehigh Valley. And our goal is to design a lightweight rooftop solar array for this subset of warehouses. And we're specifically focusing on using thin film in this application. So the picture to the left here is your traditional silicon panels, which are rigid, a lot heavier. And you can see to the right, these thin flexible panels are thin film solar. So the scope of our project addressed here, we're starting with assessing the need in the Lehigh Valley. And along with this, coupled with it, is determining the maximum load for our design, which Laura touched on load as well a little bit. It's different for every single warehouse. So it's something, while we evaluate who needs this, we can figure out what it needs to be designed to. We're also evaluating the existing technology with the existing thin film solar on the market and the existing racking systems to see if something that's already produced could be used for our project. And we're also establishing partnerships with key businesses just for freedom of information. We're looking with specifically thin film manufacturers, racking manufacturers, and battery storage as well. We're hoping to couple with this. So I have a different figure of representing load. So when you evaluate whether or not you can install rooftop solar on any structure, you're really just evaluating the loads. There's a lot of different things that come into play here. So load is a force on a building. There's multiple types of load. There's dead load, which is just the weight of the roof membrane or maybe your HVAC system, things that are permanent. There's live loads as well, which are ever changing. There's that snow load and wind load as well. And this is very specific to the area you're in, what height you're at. So this is very specific to each warehouse. To evaluate to evaluate the load that you need to have remaining for installing a rooftop solar, you need to take into consideration all of these loads at the same time. So for us to figure out how heavy our lightweight solar array can be, we need to evaluate multiple warehouses in the Lehigh Valley, determine what load they can accept, and then try to design something that can accommodate most warehouses in the Lehigh Valley. So to evaluate this, we're mainly right now trying to find warehouses that fit our subset and then figure that information out. So we initially started with looking at the international building codes. The 2015 ones are the most relevant ones currently. And we looked at the minimum uniform live load is a characteristic on there that's defined for warehouses. This was an easy first place to start. But unfortunately, well, I guess fortunately, that showed that most warehouses are designed to those building codes would meet, the minimum load would support rooftop solar. From then we moved on to looking at the solar assessments that Whitman has already done as a renewable energy consulting company. They've already looked at installing solar installations, but the ones that Women has designed for and consulted with all do meet the requirements to hold solar. So that didn't really give us any insight into which warehouses or the load that we're going to need. And then finally, we've contacted a warehouse manufacturer it's a global company, but they have a Pennsylvania area because this is such a popular area for warehouses. For Logis, we contacted them to see if they had tried to install solar on any of their buildings in Pennsylvania, whether they've come into the issue where they need to retrofit. And unfortunately, they have not. That Pennsylvania, as Laura mentioned, there's not a lot of incentives in this area, so they haven't really looked at this. And they also informed us that since at least 2019, they've been designing extra load into their buildings, into their warehouses to prepare for solar. So this is definitely one of the most challenging parts for us, trying to determine what our maximum load is going to be. And this is something we'll continue with next semester.
Just to talk a little bit more about some of the things that we're incorporating when we're looking at these warehouses. And again, there's a lot of parallels here between Laura's work and what she's presented on. But so with kind of our focus specifically being in the warehouse sector, we are looking at things like their energy loads, and because of the type of operations that are happening within warehouses, they tend to have a relatively flat demand for their energy. And based on the DOE data that we could find, they average about 10 kilowatt hours of energy use per square foot. This is for the non-refrigerated warehouses. So a lot of this is just lighting loads. Again, things that are relatively flat throughout the day. And as Dana mentioned, we have been looking then too at what data is available as far as specific to warehouses, the ability of loading on their rooftops. We did, as Dana mentioned, look into the building codes and try and find what that kind of ideal pound per square foot loading is in the warehouses. It's been a bit of a challenge to get that data and really nail down a concrete number. But the one number we were kind of able to find, but we'll need to do some continuing work to verify, is a loading of between 5 and 8 pounds per square foot. So this is the potential loading for warehouses in Pennsylvania or within kind of the East Coast of the United States. And so we know that the traditional ballasted panels can add anywhere from 4 to 6 pounds per square foot when they're installed as a rooftop system. So while, like Dana mentioned, there are a number of warehouses that we looked at that are able to kind of support that additional load, we are still right in that range of what typical roof loading is, and that's not taking into account some of those additional forces or additional loading components. And with that, one of those additional forces that specific to warehouses we've seen is a key component of this evaluation is the wind forces. So not only your wind forces that you would see on a typical rooftop solar installation or need to account for with a typical installation, but the kind of criteria that we've seen or the recommendations we've found say that you should include additional considerations for wind because of how warehouses are built and where they're located. They tend to be built in kind of large open fields or large industrial areas where everything is very flat, and so therefore those specific locations can see increased wind speed and increased wind forces even when compared to the rest of that area or kind of a more generalized location. So that's something that we will continue to take into account. And then also as we're talking about warehouses and some of the considerations of designs for rooftop systems and panels, the other key consideration is drainage. And so with a flat rooftop that we see at these warehouses, there's additional focus needs to be made sure that there's not pooling of water, that there's not leakage of rain or water into the facility due to how the panels are installed or designed. One thing that this is a relatively new development, so we're still kind of pursuing this avenue, but we are looking at case studies of where have warehouses been able to install solar panels. And so I was able to connect with a group called Global Links, which is a nonprofit that does have a large warehouse or commercial space here in Pittsburgh, where I'm located. It's a little bit different than Lehigh Valley, but we're still hoping that it can provide some really helpful data. And so with this example, the warehouse rooftop space is about 50,000 square feet, with the total building space being about 100,000 square feet. And so they installed a solar array in 2018, and that array is the traditional panels. The total space area of the solar installation is about 10,000 square feet. It currently supplies about 60% of the electricity needed for that warehouse. It's about a 63 kilowatt system. So as I said, this is ongoing. We're hoping to get some more data from them as far as the structural components of this project and how they kind of were able to pursue this project, but then also some more granular data around their energy use and how that's being matched with the solar array on the rooftop.
Great. And then looking at thin film solar, back to that, there's looking at what's available on the market now. There's two main types. It's cadmium telluride, which is the CDTE, and CIGS, which is copper, indium, gallium selenide. Those refer to the semiconductors used, which is what converts the solar to DC electricity. So looking at the cadmium telluride first, the most dominant manufacturer in the US is First Solar. It's actually a very popular type of thin film. It's quite prevalent, not as prevalent as silicon panels, but quite prevalent, and it has a great conversion efficiency, which is what is a great way to represent how much power you're getting. If you look at, a 375 watt panel versus the 320 watt or whatever, they can all be different sizes. So just looking at the conversion efficiency percentage is a nice way to compare. So the conversion efficiency of cadmium telluride panels is 18 to 22%, which is actually identical to a silicon panel. The issue with these is that they are sandwiched in glass, and they're actually much heavier than your silicon panels. The silicon panels are maybe 40 pounds each. The cadmium telluride panels are more like 75 pounds. So a lot heavier. That is obviously the opposite of what we want for a lightweight solution. And another issue with the cadmium telluride panels is that they do contain toxic materials. Cadmium is toxic to humans. When it's sandwiched in glass, it's fine, but it can be leached either if there's a building fire or forest fire, which damages the panels, or when being landfilled, which is what happens with most panels anyway. Once they're crushed, that cadmium can leach. And if that hits the groundwater, that's not good at all. So the CIGS panels, there's two main producers. There's Mia Soleil and Global Solar in the United States. They are much later. They're usually flexible. You can see in that picture, they're actually rolled up there. In terms of weight, they're less than 10 pounds. Some of them are 7 to 8 pounds. So significant weight reduction, but they do have a lower efficiency. So most are between 12.5% to 14% conversion efficiency. Mia Soleil actually has a pretty high conversion efficiency for CIGS panels. It's about 14.3 to 18.3%. So just hitting like the lower threshold of a silicon panel. One of the issues is because they are so flexible, there's no racking system designed for these yet. So we're really looking to have a racking system rather than what a thin film panel usually, or thin film sheet usually has as an adhesive on the back, and they will just adhere them directly to a rooftop. Sarah already mentioned on cooling on rooftops with water, you have snow buildup. They're not angled to the most effective slope because we are in the Northern Hemisphere, we want them to face the south. So you miss out on additional energy yield, and they also have lower production due to, the snow on there or a buildup of dirt and debris from water pooling. But still, we're planning on working with the CIGS panels. It's easier to work with these because they're already lighter. We don't have to worry about working with the manufacturer to redesign the cadmium telluride panels. We will need to create a rigid backing for these, and we will need to either adapt or design a racking system to go along with this. And it should be mentioned that there are also small amounts of cadmium in CIGS panels. It's used in the buffer layer, there's cadmium, but that's something that a lot of, I'll touch on this later, but many CIGS manufacturers are looking to remove that from their system altogether.
As Dana mentioned, a key component of this will be that racking material or racking system that's developed to accompany the thin film solar. And so when looking at racking systems, there's kind of two main options as far as the material. More traditionally, PV racking systems have been made out of carbon steel, which is very heavy and usually accompanies larger solar arrays and larger rooftop systems. However, in the past few years, there's been a development of an aluminum alloy racking system as well. These systems typically have about a third of the weight of the carbon steel, and they're more designed specifically for roofs that have poor weight bearing or are not able to hold a lot of additional weight or a lot of additional loading. So as we continue with this project and continue designing some of these systems, looking at how we could potentially use that aluminum alloy instead of the more traditional carbon steel could hopefully help realize some of the possibilities for the thin film as well.
Great, and then another component, oh, I think we're echoing. Okay, perfect. Another component of the racking system is how it's actually attached to the roof. So there's three types of attachment systems. There's attached, ballasted, and hybrid. The attached method is literally drilled into the roof to affix it. It's obviously the lightest option because there's no added materials. But this was mentioned before by Sarah too. With pooling on flat roofs, even though there is a mild slope, when you drill into the roof and you make holes, you have issues with roof leakage. And even if they are minor, the public perception in warehouse owners is that this is not preferred. No one wants to put holes in their roof. So typically the most popular is the ballasted system, which was also mentioned by Sarah a little bit earlier. So this is the heaviest option. It's pictured to the right here. You can see there's concrete weights on it. That's your ballast weight. There's no roof leakage because it's not attached to the roof, but the weight that the ballasts are designed for is based on looking at those loads again. It's based on overcoming the force of lift and the force of drag caused by wind. So it's going to be different for every roof, but in general, it is a lot heavier than just using an attached system. There's also hybrid systems, which are not as popular as the ballasted because they still require putting holes in your roof, but it's a mix of a ballasted and attached system. So less holes, less weight, but still ballasted is definitely preferred. So looking at ballast a little bit closer, I wanted to know if we decrease the weight, which is what we're looking to do, how will ballast weight react to that? I wanted to know if it's a 1-to-1 ratio. Is it basically going to defeat our efforts? Is it going to be a little bit less than that? So I just wanted to analyze a change in panel weight to see how the ballast weight changes with that. So I have two graphs in front of you here. Unfortunately, when it comes to ballast weight calculations, the American Society of Civil Engineers does provide calculations for that, but the most specific and most accurate come from wind tunnel testing, which is done for every single model of every racking system. So the way these ballast weights are calculated is specific to every single model. And a lot of racking manufacturing companies do not share this information with you. So unfortunately, I have a very small sample set for this analysis. It was just 2 racking systems that provided this information, Iron Ridge and Dynaracks. Iron Ridge provided a design simulator. Dynaracks provided calculations. So basically what I did is I started with a 40-pound silicon panel, a really popular model by LG. I calculated ballast requirement and total weight, and then I just subtracted 5 pounds per panel over and over again to just see what the change would be. And then I presented this, each bar is one of those 5-pound increments of decreased weight, and it's based on uniform load, just to make it visually representative. So the blue lines there, or the blue part of the bar is the rack, which doesn't change. The orange part of the line is the weight of the modules or the panels, which you can see has a linear decrease. And then looking specifically at the gray section of the bar is your ballast weight. So I wanted to see how this changes over time. You can see that the graph to the right has a very nice linear decrease in ballast weight. the graph to the left is, it changes a little bit. I was not able to determine, since I cannot see the calculations for Iron Ridge, if this is something that models their wind tunnels and there really is this nonlinear change, or if this is a failure of the model because most panels don't, they aren't as light as what I ran the model for, the design simulator. But what I found overall is that with the Iron Ridge calculations for, it's a 100% compensation in ballast weight increase for panel weight decrease. And with the dyno racks, it's a 65% compensation of ballast weight with panel weight decrease. So definitely something with such a small sample set and uncertainty with the Iron Ridge calculations. It's not something that we're willing to rule out ballasted systems altogether, especially with the preference in the industry. You know, we could create something that's attached and sure it'll fit our needs, but it doesn't mean that people will want to use it since we are putting holes in their roof. So it's something that will need further analysis. Hopefully we can gather more information and find out more ballast requirements. But you know, it's a difficult thing when you're working with businesses that don't want to provide all of their data. One of the things that we're trying to do to kind of combat that issue of not having information is forming project partnerships. We've had one successful project partnership so far, which is with Miosole, which we're very excited about because they are the CIGS manufacturer with the highest conversion efficiency rate. So we've been in talks with them. We're still looking to form a few more partnerships. So the companies that we're mainly focusing now on are for racking is PV Racking. They're actually located in Southampton, which is very close to Lehigh. And they design custom racks. So we'd love to work with them to see if they can help us design something or provide something for us, or just provide more information, maybe even on ballast weight as well. We're also looking to eventually couple this with energy storage. So we're looking at Fortress Power, which is also fairly local to the area. And we've had some talks with initially as well.
Well, we focused mostly on that, the warehouses, as we've mentioned, as we've been discussing. There's a broader goal of just looking at thin film solar applications in general. And so while a lot of this will be potential future research, I just wanted to touch on one other potential application, which is prefabricated households. And so prefab houses vary a little bit in their construction processes and in their standards. But this is a growing industry in the United States. It's about $20 billion currently, and it's expected to grow and potentially even double over the next 20 years. So these houses have the potential to reach net zero energy fairly easily with the addition of solar panels, but because of the way they're constructed, again, they might be similar to warehouses in that they're not able to support the same load as a more traditional household. And so looking at this, again, it's something that will potentially be a future project or future expansion of the work that we've been doing over the semester. But we just wanted to mention it as it is something that we focused on and spent some time researching just what other potential applications could be for thin film solar.
Great. And in terms of future work, unfortunately, nothing that we accomplished this semester 100% checked off any of our boxes for the scope. So we'll be continuing to assess the need, establish partnerships, evaluate racking and attachment options. We'll also be adding in a cost evaluation and potentially getting to the design portion. And then actually beyond, there's been some new developments with this project that might involve a partnership with Lehigh. So there might actually be some funding for Lehigh to work on thin film technology improvements, designing a lightweight racking system for this application, and then potentially more research on battery storage. So there's many new exciting developments possibly with this project. Great, and that's all I have for you. Thank you so much, everyone.
All right, thank you, Sarah and Dana. Questions for them? For some time? So if I may just quote the potential of warehouses in the United States and I'm stealing some calculations that John Beaupre put together, it's almost equivalent to our entire nuclear fleet. Almost entire nuclear fleet, which is 20% of our source of electricity. So quite significant. Questions for Sarah and Dana? Okay.
Well, thank you for your time, everyone.
There's a
Thank you.
question in the chat. Sorry to interrupt. There's a question
Yeah,
in the
I
chat.
was just gonna say that.
Oh.
You want to read it, but Rudy, or should I?
Oh, okay. For from Javed, for battery storage, will you conduct any sizing? Do you have an estimated size for the battery?
Yeah, we haven't done any work looking at battery storage yet. We were hoping to form that partnership. As you know, battery storage isn't to its full potential yet. So we're looking to make that partnership to figure that out. And then if this partnership goes through with Lehigh, we'll have some more research in this area, possibly for better battery storage technology. So far, it's still fairly large, even though we would be putting it in a warehouse space, but that's definitely something we'll be looking more into in the future.
Dana, Rudy, do I have time for a question? This is Larry.
Yes, go ahead, Larry.
Hi, Dana. Larry, Amy with a question. Both the conventional panels and the thin film panels are both still applied extras, right? That have to be put on top of the building. Is your research showing any ability or shift in materials that say that roof membranes themselves become solar panels, or that we can move to a more integrated building material, or even a different type of roof that might be a significant disruptor rather than just layering on, in effect, old technology on big roofs?
Right.
Anything in there that would give us hope?
Maybe I won't give you hope, but that's a great question. Thank you, Larry. So I would say that the thin film technology, how it is today, kind of mimics what you're talking about. It's literally adhered. They just use an adhesive backing and stick it right on top of the roof, which is great. There's no extra weight with that. That tile kind of thing, which I guess if you think about like the Tesla tiles, that works really well for your sloped roofs, not as well for the flat roofs, especially in this area, because it's going to be sitting directly on top of a flat roof. It's not going to be at its ideal angle for capturing solar energy. And you also have issues with snow buildup, especially in the Lehigh Valley, where you're not going to get any production during snow buildup. Same with if you have pooling on the roof, which does happen pretty often. That also brings in debris. It really dirties the panels much more quickly. So we are really looking to do something that looks like what you traditionally see, but we're hoping to come up with a solution that works for all types of buildings, because that is the beauty of having it already designed. You know, you don't have to worry about your structural loads. You don't have to worry about wind resistance and things like that. But for now, we're focusing on kind of sticking with the same concept.
Okay. Thank you, Dana and Sarah. So let's move on to team 6, I believe. And again, another change in pace. We'll be talking about geothermal energy, sponsored by EPRI. Garrett Moyer. Yes.
All right, can you see my presentation?
Yes.
Yep.
All right, good afternoon. Thank you guys for attending. My name is Garrett Moyer, and my presentation is going to be about borehole measurement literature review. So just to go over a little bit of my abbreviated scope, I'm focusing in on geothermal energy, which is a little bit of a change of pace. And so as you can see there on the right, that's just the basic diagram of how geothermal energy works if you're not familiar. I'm going to be doing a literature review on specifically dealing with the wells, so both the injection well and or a production well. And even as a deeper dive, it's about borehole measurement, which I'll go over a little bit more in depth later in the presentation, but just to kind of give you a broad overview, the whole idea behind borehole measurement is to gather information about either the rock formation downhole or fluids moving downhole. So again, I'm working on a literature review, basically surveying commercially available technology, and I'm seeing what's available to withstand these high temperatures. There's a lot of overlap to the oil and gas industry as far as the companies working on this stuff and their technology. However, with the caveat here in geothermal, the main thing is looking at high temperature and trying to design these tools to withstand high temperature. So again, I'm looking at the currently available commercial technology. I'll be looking at future technology and evaluating where the research is, where it's going, and what we can expect in the future. And kind of looking at 3 stages of the well process. The drilling part, which of course is the part where you're actually penetrating the rock and putting that borehole in place. The completion stage, which is another important part to gather information. And then finally in the production stage, when the well is online, again, you still need to get information downhole if possible. So my project is being sponsored by EPRI. Specifically, I'm working with Laura Chiaramonte and Dr. Andrew Coleman, and this is for a Japanese client. The company is JERD. So just to give you a little background on how the geothermal power plants can work, the most common type is your flash steam power plant. And in this case, you have a production well and it's producing liquid at a high pressure. And basically what you're doing is you're bringing it up to the surface, and in a flash tank, you're lowering the pressure and allowing the, once it goes through that sun pressure change, it turns into a water vapor, a gas, and that's able to drive the turbine, and then you're re-injecting that into the earth. This is the most common one, again, because in general, you're finding liquid when you're drilling down below the surface of the earth, primarily due to the pressure constraints. On the other hand, there are some areas where you have a dry steam power plant. However, this is not a very common one. And in this case, you're actually pulling steam directly from under the surface of the earth, and that's directly driving your turbine. And then you're able to inject that back in. Again, that's not very common. The final one is a binary cycle power plant. These ones are also more common than dry steam power plants. And in this case, you're producing either a liquid, I guess you could be producing a steam as well, but in general, it's a liquid. And then you're flowing this through a heat exchanger, and you're basically exchanging heat with a fluid that has a much lower boiling point than water. So you're able to get a gas out of that, convert that fluid to a gas, and that's able to drive your turbine. And then again, that's a closed loop system with that secondary fluid as far as heating it. And the benefit of this is you don't need as high temperatures to get your water into a gas, because you're utilizing a fluid with a lower boiling point. So in general, my methodology here is to evaluate and gather my literature sources, basically searching all over different databases and so on and so forth, to bring sources together and determine which ones are of interest, and obtain those. I won't spend too much time on this methodology just because in the interest of time, but just to give you a kind of a brief overview, then I'm reading the documents, taking notes on them, and from there, I will be able to move into interviewing technology experts and owners, which is going to be the next phase of my project. And from there, I'll be able to combine all of my findings and learnings with from these meetings into a technical briefing document. And I'll be able to present that not only to Lehigh, but also finally to the project sponsors. So to kind of understand, again, the well logging a little bit, on the right-hand side there, you can see a diagram of showing exactly what a wireline log is. And basically the idea here is you're dropping a tool, I'm not sure if you can see my mouse, but it's the black part down the well, and that is gathering information from the rocks as you're dropping it down. And hence the name the wireline, because it's suspended from a wire, and you're dropping it down the well bore. And again, you're getting different rock properties and parameters needed to not only design your surface equipment, but also your well itself, as far as like completions method and so on and so forth. Another good part, or another way you can collect data, is when the well is operating, you can understand pressure, temperature, flow rate data. That's a different part of it. So to understand how temperature actually impacts the tools, it can impact it in a couple of different ways. So first off, it can impact the tool itself and the electronics within. So so one part of my project is looking at actually high temperature electronics that are built to withstand higher temperatures. Again, it's not always, that's not always the method taken. So another option is to insulate these electronics from it, or a combination of both, depending on the temperatures that are going to be seen. But in general, you have the option of making a high temperature electronic or trying to insulate the electronics so they're not subjected to such high temperatures. Another part of the equation to look at is the data transmission to the surface, which is through the wire line. In general, you're going to try and get a live feedback from the wire line and data, and you're powering your tool that way. However, due to the high temperatures, you can corrupt data, and also the wire line itself can actually begin to break down. So that's another aspect that must be looked at. And some ways that we're trying to mitigate that is to just store the data on the tool itself. And then once you pull the tool out, you're able to extract the data. So that would eliminate the need for being able to make a wire line that can actually transmit data in such high temperatures. And then another thing to look at, again, as I said before, is that it shares a lot of parallels with the oil and gas industry. So these high temperatures can impact the traditional methods of interpretation used for the data. So generally speaking, these tools aren't directly measuring any parameters of interest. So for example, one parameter would be porosity, which is essentially measuring the void space within a given rock formation unit. You're not measuring that directly. You're using a tool that is processing the data that it's collecting to basically estimate porosity. So you have to understand that these high temperatures do impact not only the data that's being collected, but also the interpretation of that data. And you're looking for certain ranges of parameters that might be changing due to the high temperatures. A final technology that's not very mature is high temperature batteries, but it definitely is on the radar, and again would reduce and or eliminate the need for transferring power over these wire lines. So this is a quick table showing how specifically the components that are impacted by the high temperature. As you can see, this is a pretty exhaustive list. So basically you can conclude that nearly every single part of the whole tool is being impacted by this high temperature, all the way from, again, the electronics itself up to the tool housing, fluids that are within it. Just pretty much every part of it has to be considered, and that's what's one part of that makes it tough. So a specific tool that I found that's designed for these high temperatures is a Schlumberger Slim Extreme tool. In this case, it's designed to operate up to 260 degrees Celsius and 30,000 PSI. And in this tool is kind of getting into the geothermal temperature ranges. However, there's temperatures being seen in some geothermal exploration that is in excess of 300 degrees Celsius and beyond, and much beyond in some cases. So as you can see, this is just one commercially available tool, but still doesn't really break into that geothermal threshold that we're looking at. It's primarily designed for just high temperature oil and gas wells. But this is a triple combo tool. So just to speak again, it has an array induction tool, which it has resistivity, which measures at different depths of investigation. So as you're drilling, you're typically circulating fluids to remove rock cuttings and keep the bits cool. So that's actually washing out a portion of your rock formation. So when you're measuring resistivity at, say, for example, 10 inches, you're going to get a different reading because it's in the washout zone and potentially infiltrated by drilling fluid. Whereas at a 90-inch depth of investigation, you're actually getting more information about your rock formation and potentially more information that's not being skewed by your drilling fluid. The second part of a triple combo tool is your compensated thermal neutron porosity tool, which in this case it's used to find porosity. And then finally, a gamma ray cartridge, which essentially measures natural radiation coming from your formation, which can help you determine a whole host of different characteristics. So that's your traditional triple combo. Again, it's the induction resistivity, your porosity, and your gamma ray. So in addition to that, this tool has a logging head, which helps measure temperature and cable tension. So a project specifically focusing on geothermal is this Word project, which in this case, it's focusing on creating blocks, which essentially is just components that can be used to build up other tools. So the idea behind this project is to make a bunch of off-the-shelf components that, say, a service company or an operator of a geothermal drilling company, which typically a company is hired to do that, say they want to design a tool that is doing a different function than a tool that is on the market. So they're able to purchase these components, and that way they don't have to design certain aspects that have already been designed. So it focuses specifically on the tool housing because that's able to be used for a bunch of different tools, and the thermal management, which is like kind of like the insulation. So in general, they were designing to hit 200 degrees C, which again is in geothermal temperature range. However, it's on the lower end of some geothermal projects. They're looking at an open hole of 8.5 inches and finally up to a depth of around 16,000 feet, which really kind of illustrates how deep some of these wells are being drilled. A second component of this project is not only having these blocks, but also literature and essentially blueprints that these designers can look at and help use to design their tool. Again, it's in some cases, it's great that you could be able to pull an off-the-shelf component, but that's not realistic in every situation, as you can imagine. So basically what they wanted to do is have a booklet or a go-to manual that engineers can use to leverage designs that have been done before, but not necessarily in an instance where an off-the-shelf component could be utilized. So the last project that I'm going to be just briefly touching on is the High Tide project. In this project, they're focusing primarily on, they actually created 2 new tools, the temperature sensor, which is able to work up to 300 degrees C without a heat shield, which again, kind of looping back to the beginning of the project or the beginning of my presentation, in some cases, you don't necessarily need to insulate if you can get your electronics to function up to such a high temperature. But however, in this other probe for their temperature, pressure, and flow meter, they were able to get up to 400 degrees C with a heat shield. And again, these are very important metrics to understand while the well is flowing, especially so that you can adjust surface equipment and design surface equipment. So another aspect of this project is they created 2 new geothermetric relationships, which essentially is a way to use the chemistry of your well fluids to not only predict temperature within the reservoir, but also historical temperature, which can help give you information about future well placement, and kind of you can predict as well your temperatures. So that's again, this is a known topic for sometimes in oil and gas wells. However, because of the high temperatures, the chemistry is different, so they came up with different relationships to kind of overcome that. And then just kind of as an aside, our traditional silicon and insulator technology, which is the way that our electronics are manufactured now, is generally reliable up to 225 degrees C for limited amounts of time up to 300 degrees C. So again, that's kind of the limiting factor in a lot of cases, since it's difficult to insulate in such high temperatures. So the next step is looking at technology for the high temperature electronics, which is silicon carbide, is kind of a breakthrough. And NASA Glenn is actually working on that. And they have the potential up to 500 degrees C. And the reason NASA is involved with this is because of their aerospace technology. They need the high temperatures to be able to withstand it. However, they have an even larger hill to climb, larger mountain to climb than geothermal folks do, because they have to work with temperatures below 0 degrees C all the way up to this high temperatures, whereas we don't have to worry about freezing temperatures. in geothermal applications. And then finally, just kind of giving, again, I mentioned before, the next steps of my project is to continue the formulation of my paper, my technical briefing document, but also to set up meetings with key technology owners and also experts. So the additional tools that I've looked at and am still looking at and gathering more information on is the Protherma PTS from Probe, which is actually pictured there and kind of gives you an idea of actually what some of these tools look like. And that's pressure temperature probe, basically. Geocam, which is a high temperature camera that can be lowered in a borehole, which can show you the borehole and the formation, which is very useful for geothermal projects because you can understand fractures and where they are, which is what makes up most of the porosity in geothermal systems. Finally, another project is the D-Scramble project. Sorry, could you say that again? Which is, this is essentially looking at drilling a well in Italy and proving some technology for the high temperature. And then finally, Halliburton, which is a big service company, they have both the Quasar Pulse and the Quasar Trio tools, which I'm going to be gathering more information on. And these are logging while drilling tools, which means you're essentially getting data as you're drilling the well. That's what I have for you today. I appreciate your time again. And if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask. Thank you.
Thank you, Garrett. Questions for Garrett? Any perspectives from EPRI on this project, Laura or Andy? Okay, all right, let's move on to project number 7. Carol will be presenting it. She's with PP&L and this project is sponsored by PP&L. So Carol, you have screen access? Yeah.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Before I start, I just want to give a very big thank you to my advisor, Kim Gottner from PPL Electric Utilities. She's the supervisor of distribution interconnections and tariff rules. So I want to thank her for her time, attention, and inspiration. Okay. I'm studying voltage optimization methods on a distribution grid that is seeing increased levels of distributed energy resources, which I'll refer to as DERs. DERs can be any renewable resource like wind or biomass, but in Pennsylvania, solar is the most common, and that can be paired very easily with storage. Optimizing voltage is vital because a fundamental utility responsibility is to manage voltage at the rates prescribed by the American National Standards Institute, ANSI C84.1. As you can see, the utilities have to stay within a plus or minus range that you see there of 5%. And they could, though, get out of that range, but only during abnormal operations, and it must be for a brief time. There are these strict guidelines because high or low voltages can damage customer and utility power electronics. Managing voltage, it gets interesting when we no longer have one-way flow of power that we have had traditionally. It is changing to a more distributed way of generating power in smaller amounts. And these systems allow customers to become prosumers of energy, so producers and also consumers of energy. They're reconfiguring the grid to a more dynamic two-way flow of power from resources that are also inverter-based, and in the case of wind and solar, are intermittent. The benefits of DER are undeniable. They can help increase grid reliability, lower energy costs, and help achieve sustainability and environmental goals For instance, if a utility did not have to plan, design, construct system reinforcements, the time and expenses saved could be huge. It could significantly reduce the cost of energy when utilities could lean on renewable energy DERs and not have to install capacitor banks or any number of other conventional, traditional voltage management equipment. The grid of the future is also one that is transactive, a transactive energy system where I could trade renewable energy with my neighbor. How cool. But we aren't quite there yet in fully understanding how to integrate DERs successfully, especially when they're intermittent. Using information from EPRI illustrated on the slide, on the scales actually, you can see the challenges we still have to overcome. I just got through saying that we're still learning how to integrate DERs, including storage, onto our grid successfully. Still, we have federal and state legislative and regulatory decisions, actions, pushing higher penetration of renewable energy. The rates will keep rising. Our new president campaigned on a, quote, clean energy revolution and environmental justice platform. Then on November 15th, he signed into a law a new bipartisan infrastructure bill that dedicates considerable attention to energy and storage. Also, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission's Order 2222 allows aggregation of DERs for supporting the transmission grid. Without combining these distributed energy or storage technologies, these individual systems would not have been able to meet the minimum size and performance requirements. Now they can. And it's a recognition that these resources can contribute to reliability, a lower cost through competition, and negate infrastructure costs that utilities would have had to make. On the state level, the PUC is currently asking stakeholders for feedback on possibly incorporating storage as a distribution asset for grid resiliency and reliability. The DEP also convened an energy storage consortium and even released the report shown on the slide in the middle there in April. Very good report. I recommend everyone read that. Another crucial constituency, lest we forget, are stakeholders who are demanding quicker switch to renewables and asking for climate risk disclosures. Momentum is on our side to figure out how to overcome DER's grid instability and integrate storage. This is where my project comes in, which is a two-pronged approach. On one level, utilities could take advantage of advances in storage technologies that act faster than conventional voltage management equipment. So I am wondering, what are the possible guidelines for when, where, how, and how much energy storage would be necessary to provide the rapid voltage support for feeders with high DERs penetration? And we must also understand what can be done on the customer side, customer level, when using one of the grid support functions to manage voltage available from smart inverters per the IEEE 1547-2018 standard. So I'm curious in knowing what are the technical impacts, costs, and benefits that voltage/active power or volt-watt mode can have on solar smoothing. The bottom line is this: managing voltage with increased inverter-based DERs that are also intermittent on the distribution system can improve reliability, decrease energy costs, and achieve our sustainable goals. But we must figure out the how as soon as possible. Here's a visual of how much more complicated it is for a future grid that is more inverter-based, especially when these resources are intermittent. The study referenced here, conducted by NREL researchers, noted that historically, generation mainly came from electromechanical methods via turbines with large rotational inertia, the one-way flow of power. Utilities had to focus on items on the left-hand side to maintain stability. With a two-way flow of power, there's much more to manage to maintain stability. We also must must recognize the impacts of hidden load or cold load pickup on grid stability. The takeaway is this: it's more complex to manage. The Electric Power Research Institute 2014 report was prescient with its proposed action plan for the successful assimilation of DERs, which included the following parts outlined on the slide. They emphasized the need to ensure that there was visibility of these systems so they did not remain hidden load. Utilities could then incorporate these systems into distribution planning and operations. Over the past 2 decades, various states actually have served as testing grounds for consumers transitioning from consumers to more prosumers. The experiences of especially these 2 states, Hawaii and California, are very instructive. In many ways, the Hawaii Electric Company's Tariff Rule 14H and California PUC's Rule 21 have paved the way for national standards. Although standards have come a long way, challenges remain, especially given solar energy's popularity. Solar can be intermittent for a whole host of reasons, such as season, time of day, clouds, dust, haze, shadows, rain, snow, and dirt. From a study shown in this slide here, I have the source listed there, you can see fluctuations based on clouds and rain. The graph shows sharp differences in power output. Just imagine if the graph had data on 15-minute intervals, how those high and dramatic swings of voltage would look, and more importantly, the difficulty for utilities to stay within the ANSI range A. Moreover, how do these fluctuations impact the traditional utility scale voltage management equipment that wears out sooner the more they're used? That's where energy storage comes in. NREL researchers, among others, are finding it can play a vital role in filling the gaps or smoothing out those fluctuations. Energy storage is at the tip of everyone's tongue these days. Utilities currently own just 4% of, and this is nationwide, of small scale storage under 1 megawatt connected directly to the distribution grid. They own 20% of storage that is large scale or over 1 megawatt. What would be reasonable and appropriate guidelines if they owned more, and under what conditions in Pennsylvania? All crucial questions that are worth further investigation. Now to how utilities can manage voltage at the customer side. But first, some background on grid modernization to help us understand the how. The visual on the left reflects what's happening in the field because it has been quite a journey. The industry has taken great strides towards improving standards through UL 1741 SA and then SB, and of course the IEEE 1547-2018, which I'll elaborate further a little later. That has led inverters to become more intelligent and offer more autonomous grid support functions. Other technological advancements have allowed the grid to become more modernized and automated, thereby relying more on machine learning. Things like advanced meters, sensors on the distribution grid that reroute power automatically without needing a system operator, and advanced distribution management systems are all examples of, quote, the smart grid designed as a low latency system. However, the journey continues. The traditional way the utilities managed voltage was by using a load tap changer, transformers, voltage regulators, capacitor banks. When that was with a one-way flow of power, these devices inject power. That's because when there's no DER, a voltage traveling down the feeder begins to drop. So these devices make sure the voltage goes up to stay within the ANSI range A. DERs, per the current IEEE 47, 2018 standard offer support functions through their intelligent inverters. Although the voltage regulation by reactive power control is more robust in the standard also identifies voltage and active power control. Under normal operating performance, the voltage and active power control requirements include a volt-watt mode. Again, it's essential to underscore that using DER to support the grid versus having utilities use traditional equipment requiring planning, design, construction could save money. And that's why this is important. It might be helpful to step back and review the power triangle here. Apparent power is the total power delivered to an AC circuit that has an active power component consumed by resistive loads in the circuit and produces useful work. On the other hand, the total power might have a reactive power component needed to maintain or charge inductive and capacitive fields in the circuit. Both inductive and capacitive loads need reactive power. The reactive component could be inductive, which absorbs VAR. The reactive component could also be capacitive, which injects VARs. The power factor or angle is in unity 100% when both reactive and active power levels are equal. In the IEEE standard, which focuses heavily on the reactive power, we benefit from a reminder that in AC power, voltage, the force that pushes the electric charge, and the current, the movement of the electric charge, are constantly alternating. Back and forth, electric power is optimized when voltage and current are aligned. However, there may be times when the voltage and current are not in sync in their respective alternating patterns, such as when a motor is running. So more total power may be needed to create the same amount of active power that loads can absorb. The standard allows smart inverters to either inject or absorb reactive power, which brings the voltage and current back in alignment and makes the electricity easier to consume and helping utilities stay within ANSI's range A. So again, what I'm trying to do is so the methodology that I'll be using to undertake my study is to use ESE, which is a widely used power flow software, to model feeders with high DERs penetration and voltage variability based on solar output using DER management data to design guidelines for utility scale and for any utility scale energy storage system, and then evaluate a volt-watt mode for inverter-based DERs and their impact on solar smoothing. I'm also going to be using Microsoft's Power BI to synthesize data to further support the project's scope. So I'm currently trying to learn SIME and Power BI, so I have not collected any data yet. However, my very preliminary hypotheses are that optimal guidelines for energy storage systems will depend on having robust parameters, and then technical impacts of volt-watt will depend heavily not only on the time of day, but on the distance of the DERs to the substation and whether it's during peak usage season or during the shoulder months. And then costs will be high, costs low and benefits high of volt-watt available through the smart inverters. And to be determined next semester are the results, the analysis, and the conclusion. And that is it, folks. Any questions? And I hope that I stayed within 15 minutes, Rudy. I tried.
Carol, you did a great job. Questions for Carol?
Rudy, this is Jim Gallagher.
Yep.
Hi, I just wanted to make a point. And the one thing I really liked that you included in your presentation was the problem statement and the research questions. You know, basically, what is the current, especially underlining what is the current practice and what's the problem we're trying to achieve, to address. And the reason I say that is because some of the earlier presentations that I was scratching my head, like, well, what is the current practice, or what is the problem we're trying to address here? And I'm thinking in particular the virtual power plant, presentations, especially. I think it's very important for all the projects to know what is current practice, what's working, what's not working, and what are we specifically addressing through this study right here. And I like that was included in this presentation.
Thank you.
Good comment.
Thank you.
Anything else? Or
Rudy, can I ask a question? This is Jim Robinson.
Yes. Yes.
And I really did like the presentation, and I think your inclusion of local batteries is very worthy. I think one of the things that you might want to consider is there is new inverter technology that allows kVAR control of the output of solar and kVAR control output of batteries for voltage control. And some of the cheaper designs of inverters do not include those. So I'd suggest in future work, you assess the state of the art and also what needs to be improved on radial distribution feeders to control voltage using enhanced inverters, both on solar, wind, and batteries.
Will do. Thank you.
Okay.
Hey, Ramesh, is Revit.
Yes.
Just a quick comment, and again, this may be in the scope, may not be, but that is simply the impact of this intermittency, especially on the time scales, as you showed one of your charts, how short time frame that intermittency can be, not only due to variations in the renewable fuel source, but also simply that demand and generation don't always line up. The question I have is the work considering the impact on dispatchable assets and the higher degree of flexible operations created by the intermittency? That is also another aspect of the grid impacts, because sometimes those assets are not always capable of that flexible operation. If that is not part of the scope, which I would understand, it's a sizable project, I think that's a future connection should be looked at. Thanks.
Okay. Yes, I was just looking at mostly high DR penetration on feeders that are mostly from solar. So solar inverter based resources, because that's what's most popular in Pennsylvania. So that's what I'm looking at.
Okay. All right. The normal questions, I'd like to thank the students for their presentations. And so I'm going to be a little creative with the time that we have on our agenda. So the breakout and evaluation sheet completion, I'm going to include any general questions you have of any one of the talks that you heard. Plus, in the background, you can be completing the forms that's your homework. It must be submitted. And Susan will help you along to make sure that it's done okay. So open the floor for general questions to the students. Please complete your evaluation forms as we talk. And bottom line is there's no break. And Bashar has been very flexible, so he's willing to start a little after 3 o'clock. General questions for all the talks that you heard. Susan, can you give us an update on the evaluation forms that you've received so far?
Yes, hold on a second. I wasn't prepared for that on the fly question, but yes. I have received 9 so far.
Okay. So maybe in the interim, if you haven't completed it, please complete those evaluations before we get on to the keynote address by Bashar.
Dave
Yes.
Turner. Dave Turner, just real quick. A couple of folks, I know Carol and others, talked about needing 15-minute data. I can provide 15-minute data for about 15 or 20 solar and gas generation and storage projects on a blind basis if anybody needs it for about 2 years worth. And Carol, I know 6 or 7 of those are in PPL's territory if you need them direct, if that would help you. I may have to ask the customer for permission, but it shouldn't be a problem.
Thank you for the offer. I'll keep that in mind. Thank you so much.
Open to general questions of the speakers. Okay. In the meanwhile, please complete your evaluation forms. We find this feedback that we get from you guys to be very useful, especially with sharing with the students. In fact, James's comment about what problem are you solving and what's your research addressing, what's been done previously, I think it's so important. I can assure you that next time around the spring meeting, they will be very conscious of putting that in perspective when they make these presentations. A good suggestion, James. Okay, I guess there's no questions for the students. I think you can complete your evaluation form as we bring in Bashar. Bashar, if you're available. Bashar is a manager for the DER lab at PP&L Electric Utilities, and he's been very kind in offering this keynote address. And just as an aside, in the spring semester, we'll be doing a tour of your lab. I don't know whether it's going to be virtual or whether it's going to be in person or a hybrid version of that. So Bashar, if you're ready to start your talk, I'll give you the screen.
Thanks, Rudy. I appreciate it. Very impressive presentations by everyone. Let me start with that. And it's tough to be presenting after Carol. So Carol, you helped me out by presenting some of what I was gonna present, and hopefully I could do as well as you've done, but good job, everyone. So I'm not seeing myself on the screen. Is my video on? Yes. Okay, thank you, Susan. Okay.
Hey, Rudy.
Yes.
It's Cliff Chapman. Can I ask a question or?
Oh, yes, I think if as long as Bashar is loading, go ahead.
Yep. Hey, Carol, this is Cliff Chapman. I'm a Lehigh alumni. I run a company called Syncarpa Capital, and we own and operate solar and solar plus storage assets on the distributed generation side. One of the things that we've actually seen in reality when utilities are studying solar and solar plus storage is that they're making assumptions about when the storage might actually be used, pushed, essentially, I guess, the storage used and deployed. And we've found that, at least in Massachusetts, a lot of the utilities have been studying, assuming that we deploy the storage at like the worst possible time. I don't know how, so assuming that, in essence, the owner is uneconomic and decides to, either charge from the grid at the peak or push out, the storage like in the middle of the night. I don't know how you're thinking about your analysis, but just that's something that we've seen in reality. And I think the reason perhaps utilities do it is because they don't think they have control of that. And so they're worried from a reliability perspective that folks like us might do things that are super uneconomic and foolish. but they don't have control to stop it. So just, I'm not sure, I just wanted you to share that with you as you're thinking about your analysis. And I don't know if it'll be helpful or interesting, but I just wanted you to have a sense of what I've seen in real life.
Well, thank you, Cliff. And I actually would love to chat with you further afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you, Cliff. Bashar, you can see your screen. So
okay, very good. Thank you very much for confirmation. But again, I want to applaud every one of the teams. Good presentations. It fits nicely with the grid transformation and what's happening in the industry, in the energy sector. I was talking with Rudy recently in general, and he asked me to come in and speak about from within the utility, what we see, what are the big things that are happening, the impact on the way our business is going, and how what else we need to do beside what we're doing today to meet the challenges from the DER growth and other factors that were mentioned. Some of them were mentioned during this presentation. So what I'm going to cover here, and given the background, the wide range of background of the audiences, so it's going to be a high level. Please feel free to ask me questions if you want to dig deeper into the topics. And Carol did a nice job, touch base on, I guess, a lot of things I was going to cover. So I'll stay away from duplicating. But what I'm going to cover here is the electric grid transformations and the drivers impacting the transformations. Highlight challenges and opportunities as we see them. And then my main intent of this is to give you some thoughts for students who would like to look for other ideas in the future for innovation, and then what utilities need to do about them, and high-level overview of what PPL is doing, just give you a little bit of what we're doing here. So the transformation grid is not the one I'm showing here in the picture, by the way. It's this one, if you wonder. So our life now became very complex and very dependent on the electric grid. The modern way of life is so dependent on the grid and how it's being functioned. The grid sets the foundation that allows us to illuminate our homes, run the businesses, power the communications, and is becoming essential in running our transportation system and maintaining the health of the supply chain as well. Given how critical the grid is, it has become recently local, national.
Bashar, I think you're sharing the wrong screen. We just see the,
Am I?
you know,
Yeah. Let me just do a slideshow then. Thank you. Yeah, so basically what I was going to highlight here is some of the recent events that occurred in the country, from the recent Texas ice storm that led to
I don't think that's still correct, Bashar.
Oh, I'm sorry, Dave. I'm probably showing my notes. Yeah.
PPL logos.
Yeah, PPL logo.
Give me a second. Let me just get back. Thank you for. Okay, how about now?
There's nothing shared. It's just we see everybody's faces.
Nothing yet. Okay. I thought I took my time to work this system before this presentation, and I apologize.
While you're sharing, it's just still the PPL logo.
Okay.
Is it because does it say Microsoft Teams down there on the bottom of your screen? Because we're in Zoom.
No, I know you gave me the administrative control here, Susan, but it's not showing that. Sorry.
Hey Bash, it's Matt. On your Zoom controls, you should have a green share screen button. And if you click that, it should give you some options as to which of your screens you can share. And it just seems like you may have selected the wrong screen. I suspect you have two screens.
Okay,
so,
let's do that again. Thanks, Matt.
Yep. There we go.
How about now?
Yes.
Yep.
Yep.
Perfect.
Oh.
No, back again.
Well, it's a two-slide view. We're seeing your next. There you go.
Okay.
All right. Very good. Okay. Sorry about that. Okay. So I want to go back and highlight the recent events that occurred, starting with the February event in Texas, where we lost the grid for a few days, and how impactful that was in our life. We also remember the cyber attack in Ukraine, as well as some other major events that impacted the electric grid and how that stopped pretty much the life and in some cases led to death. So it's really crucial that we're talking about the grid and the transformation happening, and all these projects that were mentioned fits nicely with the transformations of the grid. So I want to move to drivers that are impacting the utility business and how we see it, again, based on, I'm going to try to address in my presentation some of the questions I was asked since Rudy has asked me to come in and speak about them. And also, if you have any additional questions, we'll address them in the end as well. So let's start with the external drivers impacting the utility business. These are net and new. For a long time, regulations continue to impact the business and how the strategy and even the financial aspects of the utilities and the technology developments within the utility is impacted by regulatory aspects. However, recently under the climate change and the push for to go away from the fossil fuel to more clean energy, the electrifications, and to kind of push more toward renewables in the industry, led to a lot of additional regulations that impacted the business. And I heard early on in one of the presentations about the FERC 2222, and that's one of the main topics that we're discussing now within the utility. It's no secret storm is on the rise. I think in the month of July, we had 21 days or 22 days storm. This continued to happen, looking back at the trend, and it impacts the way that the grid is transforming as well. Because of all the growth in technology at the customer's level, customers now demanding higher level of quality as well as real-time data. And those are main focus as well in within the utility. When we look for technology and implementations of new systems, we keep in mind that any systems that we adopt must provide real-time data. And also the rapid growth of technologies, mainly I want to focus on the solar, the battery, or even a combination of both, driving a lot of our strategies, new strategies, or shift of existing focus to new things that forming the transformation. Internally, aging infrastructure is a big thing. I'll give you, for example, we at PPL, we just celebrated 100 years last year. So we have a large portion of the system, it's aging, even though we've been addressing for that for several years, but this is the case, I would say, across the country. Budget is limited, and we also need to shift the skill set and focus on building the culture. that no longer focus on the traditional way of doing the business. However, looks for new innovative ways and be able to not think about the past. So I know we struggle during large amount of changes within a short period of time to make that shift. And that is highlighted as one of the drivers or key drivers that impacts the ability to move faster on the grid transformation scale. So Carol showed the power triangle. It's helpful to go back in history a little bit, to go back to the basics. I want to highlight here some key events since the creation of the light bulbs back in 1878. So a couple events happened on the transformation journey. The first thing was the war of the currents between Tesla, Westinghouse, and Edison. Back then, between the DC, which was a dominant things, where every customers had to have their own power line running from their own house to the generation station. So the picture on the right side, up on the right side of the screen, you see how complex of a system is that. And that was during the DC period. And then the AC won, and then provided the capability to transmit the electricity much longer. And then in the 30s, the Rural Electrification Act, where the governments provided loans that extended or helped to extend the lines to even further areas outside the urban portion of the grid, and where everybody was connected to the grid. In the 90s, that's where we started seeing the growth in communication and the infrastructure, cellular, which sets the foundation to establish communication with electric devices and make it telemeter devices and get the data back. But it still required manual control at that time. And lately in 2010, and that was really the major highlights that is driving the main transformation we have today, is that the significant growth in the distributed energy, or the talk about the climate change that led to significant growth in the generation on the grid. So I'm showing here the grid today, and there's an overlap, even though we have some of what I'm showing on the right side today. But really the grid that we had so far until recently was always one-way power flow. We had no or little visibility on the assets. We had no control, automatic control. Everything was done by having a human beings in controlling the system in system operation. And that was okay, because we didn't have the complexity that we were expecting or we're having today and to the future. We had always to provide reliable and cost-effective service. So how we see the grid changing in the future? We see, and again, we see some of that today. We see the grid having a multi-directional power flow. Electric vehicles, as you see, is an added element on the grid. Customers having their own solar, utilities having battery scale, large battery system. We have real-time communication coming in from all these devices into a very complex command center. We have a need for energy efficiency, and the Internet of Things inside homes also, it's going to be a big thing happening. So what's not changing is that we need to continue to provide stability, resiliency, reliable service at a lower cost, while the grid is changing dynamically and more than ever. So I want to present here some of the challenges, again, for the purpose of just giving some ideas for future projects. And I didn't know if there are some of the folks who are looking for new ideas for future next year project. But the significant growth in distributed energy resources presented as a challenge, presented an opportunity to integrate and control by the utility. Carol touched base on that a little bit in her presentation. The two-way or the multi-directional power flow brought in reliability concerns on the grid. We always planned the system to go one way from the substation down into the lost customers on the line, and then wire sizes change as we proceed downstream of the breaker. Now we have a power flowing back, so voltage optimization is a need, is a necessity. And again, I'm glad that Carol presented on this and others were talking about aspects of the energy and voltage optimization. Hidden load is going to be a main concern unless we get ahead of it and have good control, be able to have a good system in place to identify the hidden load, or we will be burning wires and systems. Multi-directional power flow present the opportunities to have automatic and adaptive production and settings, as well as planning capacity, where again, having the power flow from the breaker down, and now you're gonna have it backward. So this is a very complex dynamic in the planning world that requires a robust planning system that's capable of doing short-term planning and determine what's needed on the system, again, to be able to handle the capacity that's flowing backward. So that's what I call short-term planning, and that's not going to be feasible using human beings. It's going to require a lot of effort. So we need good forecasting systems in place. The customer's demand for real-time data presents opportunities for additional sensors and automation ideas on the grid. Communication solutions is the core topic now in the utility. We're talking about how to establish communication with the microinverters, speaking 2030.5, as well as the electric vehicles and other aspects of smart inverters and other technologies speak 2030.5. So this is another opportunity for future innovative projects. Lower revenue coming in from the increased customers generation. This is a fact, it's happening. It may not be visible for the external world, but within the utility business, that's a core concern or focus we need to keep in mind, which present opportunities for us to look for innovative ways to improve on hosting capacities, meaning be able to host more DERs on the system without the need to do reinforcements or even defer the investments to the future. Aging infrastructure continue to be a concern. We need to continue innovating in the world of O&M reduction. Look for ways that for example, I'll be talking a little bit about what we've done to move from time-based to condition-based maintenance, utilizing data analytics and big data. So that's the machine learning is also another idea for future projects. What do utilities need to do to meet the future challenges on, again, a larger scale? We need to continue to operate the grid safely, implement all these smart technology and flexible and improve the flexibility of the grid, but keep the cost low for customers. So it's a tough balance. However, that's where innovation comes in with all these new projects. We need to have full visibility and control as a utility on the generation, not only the load on the system, and drive for energy efficiency. Continue the focus on automation. A lot of new technology came in recently, and we're working within PPL on so many different aspects of it, especially in the operation system, to provide the operators with the tool they need to operate the grid, the complex grid we're talking about here, and leverage advanced technology and big data, not only the technology in the utility business or the utility world, but also look for what's happening somewhere else. I have a picture of a drone, for example, that it may not be easy to link into how will that benefit the utility when you look at it first, but I'll talk about that a little bit in the later slides. So what's PPL doing to address the DER challenges? It's before I get to that around the DER management, I want to touch base on what we've done so far to get to this point. So starting with building a robust communication foundation, we implemented the AMI network, robust fiber system around the service territory. And then we deployed advanced operation systems to provide the operators, again, with good control of the system. We updated all the standards, including storm hardening and implementing smart technology that has a brain to it to allow us to not only get the data, but also control it. Upgraded the aging infrastructure. That's a necessity that must happen before we get the foundation to manage the DER or to even see the data coming back. We can have that while the grid is falling apart. Automation, visibility, and manual control. Tons of sensors and added controls to existing devices that provided visibility. But at that stage, we still needed the operators within the control center to operate the grid. So we moved that to the next step where we brought in automated systems in operation. That's the FISR. It's fault isolation and service restoration. It's an automatic response to faults occurring in the system and how we need to sectionalize down to the smallest number of customers to reduce the impact. And then recently we deployed load voltage management system to do exactly what FISR is doing, but that's mainly focusing on the voltage optimization and voltage management. Leveraging data analytics, we've done a lot in that space to leverage big data, which helped us to move into a condition-based maintenance, reduce O&M. The reason why I'm mentioning O&M here, the maintenance cost, is early on talked about less revenue coming in as a result of this increase of generation. The grid is aging, so we need to find a better way to find the capital necessary to invest in the system and keep it going. And the revenue is going down, so the only way that we could have that fund that's necessary is by focusing on lowering the O&M. And finally, this is kind of setting the foundation for the DER management questions I've been having, and I'll try to share as much as I can within the boundaries, given the fact that this is kind of right now it's regulatory driven. So we're doing a lot in this space to enhance our systems, make it DER aware, provide capability to have control of the DERs on the grid. FERC 2222 was also presented in one of the earlier presentation. So we're looking into forecasting systems to be able to handle the respond to the aggregation in the future. And we're working on adaptive protection initiatives to establish automatic and adaptive protection on the system to be able to respond to various, I would say, sudden changes to the system. Again, given the complexity that's happening on the grid, we cannot continue doing what we were doing in the past, meaning relying on the human to execute certain aspects of functionality. That's going to be impossible at some point in the future. So we're focusing a lot on enhancing the operation system. So we deployed DMS, deployed advanced AMI, metering, deployed advanced infrastructure, communication infrastructure. And a couple of years ago, we also deployed the DERMS that provided visibility on the DERs. And we continue now to build upon existing strategies and existing systems. So without going much into the details of the DERs, but what we're working on under DER management is making sure right now we have good handle on all of these smart inverter technologies coming in. What you see on the top left is a micro inverters that we have that connected to our grid. And on the left side, those are various types of inverters that we have them in the lab that Rudy talked about at some point earlier. So we have built a good, I would say, advanced lab with quite a bit of technology that will help us to continue growing in the space of DERs. We're in the execution phase of the DER management pilot that we have approval from the state to execute, and we started that back on January 1st, 2021 this year. So we're getting up into a very strategic phase of that project. We see the data now back in our operations center. Again, it's a very interesting project. We've never done that in the past, where you see rooftop solars and all of these technology that meets the latest IEEE 1547 supplemental B that was issued again in 2018. And what you see on the right side of the slide here is a couple of the technology, some like new controllers and systems that we use to test. So I know I had some questions about the environments that PPL has to support some testing and some experiments for future projects. And I just wanted to put this here to give some of you guys an idea that we do have an advanced system that we may be able to have you host you here at PPL and help you out and test some of the products that you're working on. So what I wanted to give here, a message out of this slide, is to demonstrate that you probably don't see a lot of the utility vehicles on the road anymore. You don't see on the lower side of the screen those kind of switching activities in the field. All of that happened because we've been leveraging the technology to build and associate brains with the hardwares in the field, and through robust communication network, we've been having avoiding the need to be out on the road. We've been doing a lot of activities in the field remotely, whether it's a programming or switching, and this is going to be more necessity as more technology keeps coming in a short time frame moving to the future. It's not always technology within the utility sector that will benefit us. We have to keep an open mind and continue looking for other technologies outside the energy space. So for example, the drone. We made a good use of the drone. Basically, we avoided the need to be, again, out doing inspections, provide us with thermal imaging as well. So we're leveraging that technology. But I wanted to pay your attention to other technology. I know we talked a lot about solar, but keep your mind open when you look in your projects about where else you could leverage to bring into the utility sector and improve the performance of the service and keep the cost low. The picture I have on the left, that's the advanced meter that replaced the need to go out and read meters. And we've done this back 20 years ago. We no longer read that. The picture on the lower right side, that's how we're leveraging AMI technology to disconnect meters during fire caused by gas leak. And what I'm showing on the bottom left is that we are right now on the path to pretty much exclude the need or not have a need for an operator sitting behind the desk and operate the grid, because we build robust and we invested more and more in the ADMS system and Fizzer and LVM and all of these systems I mentioned earlier. We only intervene when the systems fail, and we need to continue enhancing the system so we intervene less and less in the future. So here's where you come in. As you pick your projects or you proceed with your project and you look for other ideas, you need to apply the learnings that you gain from your projects and learn from what happens in other, would say, sectors, not just in the energy sectors, like in the transportations, in Microsoft, in other businesses as well. Tesla, for example, what kind of technology that you could leverage to achieve the mission of transforming or helping to resolve the problems and meet the challenges coming in from all of these transformation activities happening on the grid. Be a leader, and sitting and waiting until we're faced with the challenges is not the right thing to do. We need to be ahead of the challenge. We need to do whatever it takes now to be ready for the complex system that we foresee in the future, and be ready to maintain the resiliency, the stability of the grid, prevent a blackout. That's going to be an essential while we integrate all of these technology into the grid. We need to continue thinking innovatively about not forgetting about the basic of the grid, which to keep things running, to provide reliable power at a lower cost to our customers. So overall, a lot of challenges brings good opportunities for all of us to think innovatively, leverage other technologies, use big data, work for the best interest of customers, and drive the grid in the nation to be one of the best in the world. And we're heading into an interesting time in the future where technology is going to be dominating our homes fully, starting, from, we already have the thermostats and other things right now, and we start seeing a lot of that, garage doors and other pieces of controls inside our homes. But also the grid is transforming significantly. And as you proceed with your projects, and whether you worked at a utility before or not, I think will be helpful to connect the dots between all of these elements that are happening on the grid, not only the solar and the DER, but keep in mind that we still need to keep the grid going into the future. So Carol helped me to avoid talking about some things, so hopefully I was able to give you some idea about what we're thinking about here within the utility sector that keeps us up at night, keeps us going and energized to find solutions to support the grid to the future. And thank you all. I appreciate the opportunity. Open for any questions you may have.
Oh, great talk, Bashar. And questions for Bashar?
Bashar, Jim Gallagher.
Yes, hi, Jim.
Hi, just a question. One of the concerns I have looking at the grid, and my experience is primarily in New York, but the whole area of electrification, it's just getting a whole lot of attention. But at the same time, sometimes I'm not seeing a lot of coordination between local utilities and those who are doing the planning for the electrification. And I'm just wondering, how do you get ahead of that? Or how do you ensure that where the electrification is going to take place, the grid is capable of really handling those additional loads? And if that's part of what you're now doing, at your utility.
Yes, absolutely, Jim. That's a great question, actually. So I mentioned earlier that, if we sit and wait, that's not going to help us. So what we've done so far, we did a full analysis on our system, looking for possible potential locations where we may see electrifications going on the larger scales. And then we analyzed the grid, looking at the wire sizes, looking at the all the systems, the infrastructures we have in place, the communication aspect as well, and determined what would be the necessary enforcements needed at that time. If we will be, so we're not waiting for requests to come in to say we're going to be building a supercharging stations here, and we do the analysis. But we already did data analytic, big projects, I would say, on data analytics that we know now where within our territory, we have 10,000 square mile territory here in the state, we possibly could see larger scale electric supercharging stations.
Good, thank you.
And the communication aspect, I would say that's if there's anyone still interested in looking for ideas for projects in the future, 2030.5 communication, that's a big thing happening that we have to have good control on it and be able to establish the foundation to speak 2030.5 because electric vehicles and the technology there, most of it speaks 2030.5. So we are doing a lot in that space, but I wouldn't say that we figured it out yet, but we're working, I would say 24/7 on that aspect.
Yeah. All right, thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks, Jim, for the question.
You're welcome.
Questions for Bashar? Definitely, Bashar, we will be soliciting projects, ideas from you now that you've talked about this. So definitely the portfolio that we want to develop for next year, we want to be able to communicate with you on that.
One quick question. Horace Davis here with Con Ed. One of the challenges that we face as a utility as we look at DER, you look at the need for energy storage system and battery storage is interconnections. And that is, I think, something that utilities are going to be somewhat challenged with in terms of the number of projects that are being proposed and how those projects interconnect into our system and where do they interconnect into the system to ensure that we obtain the greatest value and we're not bottling, I think, even to some extent, the resources that's going to be needing. How is it that you're viewing interconnection, and what is it that you've seen in terms of the numbers of projects looking to interconnect to your system?
Thanks for the question. So as far as the interconnection, we have mostly now solar systems, rooftop solars. And those are smaller scales, if I understand your question correctly, Horax. We have those probably 15, 20 kW max. Those are smaller systems. We have rooftop solars, about 10 kW solars. We're seeing increase, definitely. The uptick in the generation or interconnection started in our territory back in 2016. Prior to that, we had only a couple hundreds a year and then went up about 400%. And now we're seeing an increase on an annual basis. Is there any specific areas that you would like me to touch on in your question?
I guess to some extent, maybe what you're dealing with in your service territory is a little different than what we have in my service territory, in the sense of the scale of these projects that are being proposed. You know, battery storage projects. We have projected down the road 6,000 megawatts of wind, which is going to be coming off the Long Island, Sound into the city. That is going to be a significant challenge for us. I was just wondering, because what we see here occurring is a lot more projects that are, associated with and looking to interconnect on the transmission side of the business, not just the, rooftop solar and smaller projects. So what you're facing is probably just a little different than what we're experiencing here, which is the need for those storage systems that will shift the peak and allow for us to, manage the system in a reliable fashion.
We definitely saw an increase in the scale as well, but I'm not sure we have it to the scale that you just mentioned. So that's, you're probably correct. We have it a little bit different in our two territories.
Horace, good afternoon, everybody. This is Tony McFadden, Con Ed. Horace, I just want to add that, so we at Con Ed, we've put together a new, department. It's called the PDD Group, Project Development and Delivery. And what Horace is referring to is the fact that we have so many Part 1 studies that we're getting from the ISO for all of these interconnections, wind, battery, et cetera, that we have put together a whole new department for that. And in fact, my new assignment, Rudy, I haven't had a chance to speak to you. I'm actually running a group for the Part 1 studies. So Horace is basically referring to the fact that we've been so busy just trying to keep up with the ISO and the all the new projects that we have on our plate that we have to address within a certain period of time, that we actually had to develop a whole new department just to address the new renewable projects that are coming into Con Ed.
Interesting.
Thanks.
Questions from Bashar?
So really, I would just conclude that it's going to be an interesting time working in the utility business in the next 5-10 years. As complexity continue to increase, it drives us to rethink the way that we plan, design, construct a system, and even maintain the system. We have to take this time and rethink really about all of our processes and take a look at our standards. Do we have the right planning in place? Do we have the operation systems in place? And all of this should make the puzzle that we need to make us operate the grid successfully. There's, I would say, not much time left. All of these rules under climate change, and again, the push to go away from fossil fuel, I guess 50% I heard of vehicles in the state to be electric vehicles in the next 7-8 years, and all of this push for other initiatives under the climate change. All of these are not leaving us with a lot of time for us to act. So all of the projects that we heard, and I'm sure we will have more projects in the near future. If there's any interest, Rudy, looking at some other pieces of the technology and building upon or even testing it again, I would just extend this offer to you or anybody else that we could benefit from addressing those challenges in the future. Thanks, everyone. I'm open for questions again if there are any more. If not, then I could provide my contact information if you'd like to know about any specific projects or initiatives that we're working on. And I apologize, I failed initially to give you my backgrounds. I am right now managing operations, engineering, and DER management at PPL. I skipped that slide when I was challenged initially. And my previous positions here at PPL, being in asset management, managing engineering, managed standards, relay protection, R&D and design, asset interconnection as well, and asset strategy. So I had the opportunity here within PPL to change about 10 different positions in the last 18 years I've been here. Thank you so much for the opportunity, Rudy, and I appreciate the time and the invitation.
Okay, thank you, Bashar, and you're welcome to stay for the advisory industry advisory committee council as a guest, and that's open to all the industry advisors who are present. You can join in our discussion. So let's take a short break. It's 3:45. And, maybe in 10 minutes we can reconvene. Don't turn off anything, have a tea break or a coffee break and come right back. And we'll start around a little before 4 o'clock, a slight delay in our advisory council meeting start. But we'll make up time. I'll cut back my presentation I want to hear from the council itself. So we'll come back in 10 minutes. Students, thank you very much for your dedication, your hard work, and see you next week. I'll kind of share with you some of the feedback I'll receive. Thank you, students.
Yeah, thank you everyone for your attention. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for the presentations.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.